Tonight, we're stepping into a world where every meal began with frost on your fingers, smoke in your eyes, and a prayer that the fire wouldn't die before the porridge was done. Outside, the world is still asleep, roofs capped in frost, the path to the well slick with ice. You can almost hear the silence of the snow, soft and heavy, muffling every sound except your own heartbeat. The chickens huddle in their coop, the cow exhales steam like a chimney, and the sky begins to pale just enough to reveal the shape of your day. You add logs, each one precious, each one a little decision. Burn too many, and you'll shiver tomorrow. Burn too few, and you'll freeze today. It's a small domestic gamble, the kind no one writes songs about but everyone used to live by. You stir the pot. Inside, thin oatmeal simmers with reluctant bubbles, grayish and plain. You'll sweeten it with whatever's left. Maybe a spoon of honey if luck's kind, or a sprinkle of dried apple from autumn. It isn't gourmet, but it's a meal that tastes like perseverance. And as the first smell of warmth fills the room, you remember. This was cooking before ovens and timers, before knobs and dials. Every meal was a negotiation with smoke, with temperature, with time. Too far from the fire, and your bread stays pale. Too close, and it blackens like regret. You pour your breakfast into a wooden bowl, rough and warm to the touch. It smells faintly of smoke and ash, and you swear the taste of winter itself lingers on your spoon. You eat slowly, watching your breath rise like mist. It's quiet, comforting even. Now, a small fact to wake your mind gently. By the 16th century, wealthier households in Europe started building winter kitchens, separate from the main house. Not because they were cozy, but because they were smoky disasters. Sparks could leap into the rafters, grease fires could spread, and the smell of salted pork tended to linger in curtains longer than affection did. And here's a strange tidbit. In some parts of rural Scandinavia, people would warm their bread dough by tucking it under their beds overnight. Imagine waking up to both breakfast and back pain, courtesy of the same loaf. Historians still debate whether early chimney designs came from sheer engineering genius or a collective desire not to suffocate while roasting dinner. Either way, civilization owes much to the moment someone said, "Maybe the smoke should go elsewhere." You sit by the fire now, spoon scraping the bottom of the bowl. The warmth has reached your toes, the kind of slow, creeping comfort that feels earned. Outside, the frost glitters like tiny mirrors, catching the pale sun as it climbs reluctantly into the sky. The room smells of wood and life. The walls, darkened by smoke, seem to hum with history. You imagine generations of people just like you, tending embers, stirring pots, whispering to flames, dreaming of warmth that lasts longer than the woodpile. A cheeky thought crosses your mind. You probably won't make it through this day, at least not without a nap after lunch. But that's all right. That's what these long winters were for. Sleeping, stirring, and surviving. Before we go deeper, take a breath. If you're awake, feel the air around you. If you're sleepy, let it hold you like the weight of a warm blanket. And if you're enjoying this gentle tumble through history, go ahead and subscribe. Leave a comment, maybe. Tell us your local time and whether your heater's working better than this ancient fire. Now, let's ease into tonight's journey. The wind presses against the shutters again, but the fire answers back. Crackling, steady, alive. You set aside your bowl, stretch your fingers toward the heat, and let the sound of burning wood fill the space where words used to be. You're ready to see how people cooked when fire itself was a luxury. Later that morning, the world outside is the color of pewter. Snow has started again, soft and lazy, flakes swirling like thoughts you can't quite hold on to. You open the door and the cold rushes in sharp, clean, unforgiving. The kind of cold that reminds you you're alive, though not in a particularly comfortable way. You step outside to fetch water. The bucket's metal handle bites at your palm, and the well rope creaks like an old man complaining about the weather. You pull, hand over hand, until the bucket breaks the surface with a hollow splash. The water is so cold it feels ancient. Back inside, the warmth greets you like an old friend who doesn't smile much but always shows up. The fire's still breathing, steady and calm. You hang the pot again, add the water, toss in what's left of the salted meat and root vegetables. Stew simple, eternal, and almost always too salty. Cooking in winter was never about pleasure. It was about patience. Firewood had to be rationed, ingredients stretched. In the Middle Ages, many homes kept a single pot simmering all day, called perpetual stew. Ingredients came and went, but the broth never truly ended. Some pots, it said, stayed cooking for months. A bit of rabbit one week, a carrot the next. A strange kind of culinary immortality. Historians still debate whether that stew was delicious or mildly terrifying. Probably both. You stir your own version now, watching steam rise in slow ribbons. It smells of comfort, of thrift, of smoke curling under the rafters. The cat, if you have one, eyes you with silent judgment. It knows this is the kind of meal that takes hours, time enough to doze off and wake to something edible. Here's an odd fact. Before stoves became common, people baked bread inside clay pots buried in hot ashes. Others used flat stones heated by fire, flipping the dough like pancakes. It wasn't glamorous, but it worked. The phrase half-baked idea probably came from someone who got impatient halfway through lunch. You sit near the fire again, wrapped in your blanket, the light flickering across the walls. The snow outside thickens until the world looks erased. Time slows. The stew bubbles softly, a heartbeat in the quiet, and you think what a strange thing it is to live in a time when warmth is a button, not a struggle. To cook by touch and instinct, not temperature settings or timers. Maybe there's a comfort in that simplicity. Maybe under all the smoke and ash, there was a kind of peace people don't find anymore. The fire cracks sharply, a sound like laughter in an empty room. You smile. The stew's almost done. The cold presses at the windows, but it can't come in. Not yet. And as you wait, you think, this is what survival used to sound like: one pot, one fire, one meal at a time. You wake before dawn again because in a winter kitchen, dawn isn't a polite time, it's an obligation. The cold has a habit of slipping under every crack in the door, finding you even beneath your thickest blanket. Your breath is visible, ghostly, curling toward the ceiling beams blackened from centuries of smoke. The fire has died sometime in the night. Again, it's always like this, the daily resurrection. You kneel by the hearth, clearing out yesterday's ashes with a flat piece of wood. The ashes are soft as powder, gray and fine, still faintly warm in the deepest layer. You whisper a silent hope to the embers beneath, that tiny miracle of heat that might still be alive down there. You blow gently, like you're coaxing a secret from a child. A small spark glows. Success. If you ever wonder why ancient people prayed so often, it might be because every task required faith. faith that the fire would light, that the stew would stretch, that the cold wouldn't win. You add straw, kindling, and a twist of dry moss. Catches reluctantly, then eagerly. The smell fills the air, burning earth, a faint tang of sap, and something almost sweet. You sit back, the light painting your face in amber. Firelight has a way of flattering everyone, even the sleep-deprived and soot-smudged. Today, the kitchen feels like its own little universe. The ceiling is low, the walls thick. The world beyond the door is distant, muffled by snow and wind. In here, time is elastic. You could be in 1823 or 1423. Nothing would look out of place except your socks. You begin preparing dough for bread. There's flour, a little salt, a handful of yeast saved carefully from the last batch. You mix it all together in a wide wooden bowl. The dough sticks to your fingers, stubborn and cold. Bread making in winter is half skill, half stubbornness. The yeast is sluggish in the chill, so you wrap the bowl in a wool shawl and set it close to the fire, as though you're tucking in a child. This was the rhythm of life. Light the fire, heat the water, knead the dough, stir the pot. If you did it right, the house smelled of smoke and soup and comfort. If you did it wrong, it smelled like despair and burnt onions. In wealthier homes, cooks had to rise even earlier. The grand kitchens of the 18th century were chilly stone chambers filled with copper pots, iron spits, and endless orders shouted by people wearing lace collars that never entered the kitchen. Imagine roasting an entire peacock for a noble's feast while you yourself are living on turnips. It's the culinary equivalent of smelling someone else's dinner from down the street. Forever. Historians still debate whether those cooks ever tasted their masterpieces or just suffered through the aromas like unsung martyrs of the roast. The bread begins to rise slowly, like an old man stretching after a nap. You check the pot from last night, the perpetual stew still alive and bubbling faintly. You stir, add a little water, a few stray herbs, and the last of yesterday's carrots. A new day, same stew, slightly improved. Here's a charmingly weird tidbit. In parts of medieval France, people used to flavor stews with a single strip of bacon kept on a string. They dip it in the pot for a moment, pull it out, and hang it up again for next time. It was called lard de suspendu, literally, hanging bacon. Economical, if not exactly generous. You step outside again. The air is so cold it squeaks when you breathe. Smoke rises from your chimney in a thin, wavering line. Proof that you've tamed the day, at least for now. You look around. Every house has its own plume, its own quiet struggle against the cold. There's a comfort in that sameness, the idea that everyone, rich or poor, wakes to fight the same invisible battle. Back inside, the dough has grown plump, the stew thickened, and the fire hums contentedly. The kitchen is alive again. You feel the warmth in your bones, in your fingertips, in the air that used to bite. You sit by the fire, listening to the crackle, the hiss, the soft sighs of wood giving itself away to light. This is what home felt like before radiators and gas ovens. Imperfect, unpredictable, but earned. You rest your head against the wall, close your eyes. The fire pops softly, and you imagine its rhythm is the sound of someone quietly clapping for you, for surviving another winter morning. The bread smells ready. The crust is golden, cracked, and uneven, but you wouldn't trade it for anything baked in chrome or steel. You tear it open, steam spilling into the air like memory itself. The first bite is chewy, smoky, perfect. You think, perhaps, that if happiness were tangible, it would taste like this, plain bread, eaten warm, in a room that smells faintly of survival and wood smoke. By midday, the sun has found its courage. It peeks through the clouds, weak but present, painting the frost outside in shy sparkles. The kitchen glows amber now, every beam of light tangled with ribbons of smoke. You've begun another meal, something modest but hopeful, a vegetable pie, or something that dreams of being one. The ingredients are simple: turnips, onions, a scrap of cheese, maybe a handful of barley. You chop slowly, methodically, letting the sound of the knife against the board mix with the soft murmur of the fire. Cooking in winter wasn't only a chore. It was therapy before the word existed. There was a rhythm in it, a meditative loop. Cut, stir, wait, taste, repeat. The body moved, the mind softened. In a world where everything was uncertain, the fire was the one thing that listened back. You glanced toward the window. The glass, wavy and imperfect, shows only a blur of white. Beyond it, the world is reduced to shape and sound. The crunch of a cart's wheel, the muffled bleating of sheep. You imagine other fires burning in other kitchens, each one a small galaxy of warmth and smell. And there's that odd thought again, fire as currency. In some ancient villages, people traded embers. You could carry one from a neighbor's hearth to yours in a small clay pot, wrapped in moss to keep it alive. A shared flame meant shared survival. Historians still debate whether that practice came from necessity or from something deeper, ritual perhaps, or kinship. Because giving someone fire wasn't just kindness. It was giving them life. The pie begins to take shape. The crust, made from rough flour and lard, looks homely but noble. You fill it with what you have, brush it with milk, and set it beside the fire in a heavy pan. There's no oven here, just proximity and prayer. You adjust it now and then, watching the edges brown unevenly. A few coals leap out and you laugh under your breath. Fire always demands its share of chaos. Here's a quirky fact. In some 18th century kitchens, cooks used tin reflectors, curved metal boxes placed beside the fire to catch and redirect heat. Ingenious, really. You could roast a bird and warm your hands at the same time. Efficiency, old-world style. You sit back, letting the smell of baking fill the room. It's richer now, sweet onions, buttery crust, a whisper of smoke. The cat has returned, of course, drawn by scent and warmth. It curls by your feet, twitching its tail with an air of entitlement. Outside, the wind has quieted. Snowflakes drift lazily past the window, slow as feathers falling in a dream. The kitchen, for the first time all day, feels timeless. You're not just in winter, you're inside it, part of it. You check the pie. The crust has browned beautifully, one edge darker than the rest, the way nature intended. You slice into it and the filling sighs. A little puff of steam, fragrant and humble. You take a bite. It's not perfect, but perfection was never the goal. Warmth was. There's a soft crackle from the fire, the low hum of wine through the chimney, and the occasional drip of melting frost. You lean back, eyes half closed, feeling your body unclench. And then, almost imperceptibly, you start to think of the generations before you. The cooks who tended the same flame in the same way, asking the same unspoken question each winter. Will it be enough? It always was, because even when fire was a luxury, warmth found its way through. The scent of bread, the sound of simmering, the quiet pride of a meal that didn't come from plenty, but from persistence. You smile, content, watching the last light of day stretch across the walls. The fire flickers low, but it's steady. Tomorrow you'll do it all again. And somehow that feels like peace. The night creeps in slowly, as if reluctant to disturb the gentle rhythm of your kitchen. The last embers from dinner's fire glow like sleepy eyes half shut. You're still awake, sitting near the hearth with a blanket wrapped around your shoulders. The room dim but warm. Outside, the world is silent. Just snow and moonlight, the kind that makes everything look like it's been dusted with dreams. You hear the old wood of the beams crack softly overhead. It's a familiar sound, like the house is exhaling after a long day. The air smells faintly of baked bread, smoke, and the lingering sweetness of onions caramelized by accident. This is winter at its most honest, when comfort is earned, not given. When a single flame feels like a miracle, and silence is something you can taste. You poke the fire gently. Sparks leap upward, swirling like tiny stars before disappearing. You think of all the people through the centuries who have done this same motion, this quiet act of tending light. It's almost poetic, how humanity's greatest innovation began with sitting beside something warm and staring into it for answers. There's a kettle hanging just above the coals, humming faintly. Inside, a handful of dried herbs, chamomile, mint, a piece of apple peel float lazily in hot water. The scent fills the air, green and soothing. You pour some into a clay cup and sip carefully. The slightly bitter, slightly sweet, and entirely alive. Tea wasn't always so humble. Back in the 17th century, when it first became fashionable in Europe, it was a luxury, sold by the ounce and guarded like treasure. Some people even locked their tea caddies with tiny brass keys, as though thieves were waiting to pounce on their leaves. You take another sip, amused by the thought of a nobleman panicking over stolen tea. The irony isn't lost on you. You're sitting in a room barely lit by fire, wrapped in patched fabric, drinking something humble and earthy, and yet you feel wealthier than most kings who ever lived. A sudden gust rattles the shutters. You glance up, momentarily startled. The wind outside moans softly, weaving through the chimney like a voice too tired to speak clearly. You imagine it saying, "Tomorrow will be colder." It's probably right. You add another log to the fire, careful not to smother the flame. The log catches, hesitates, then sighs into a quiet blaze. The warmth expands slowly, wrapping around you like an invisible shawl. In the flickering light, you notice how the shadows move, how they dance across the floor, climb the walls, reach for the ceiling beams. It's a private theater, performed nightly, for anyone patient enough to watch. And then your thoughts drift to the oddest things, like how people used to store heat in stones. In old European cottages, especially in the north, they'd heat flat river rocks near the hearth and wrap them in cloth to slip into their beds at night. A crude but effective early version of a hot water bottle. Some even used baked bricks. Imagine explaining that to someone from the future. Yes, I sleep with a brick. It's warm and loyal. Historians still debate who came up with it first, whether it was a matter of invention or simple desperation. You smile to yourself. Desperation has invented more comforts than genius ever has. The wind howls once more outside. You lean back in your chair, letting the creaks of wood and the whisper of fire fill the silence. Your eyelids grow heavy. The world, for all its ice and chill, feels small and safe again. Before sleep takes you, you think of one more thing. How every fire ever lit is part of the same lineage, stretching back to the first flicker in some forgotten cave. You, here now, are just one more caretaker in a very old story. Morning again. You wake to the smell of something faintly smoky and sweet. The coals from last night have gone dull, but one ember glows stubbornly in the center. A tiny red island in a sea of gray. You kneel, blowing softly until it blushes brighter. The ember responds like a sleepy friend who just needs a little encouragement. Outside, frost has claimed everything, the windows, the door handle, even the kettle you forgot by the sill. The world looks like it's been dipped in sugar and left to freeze. You smile despite yourself. It's beautiful, but also the kind of beauty that demands work. You get the fire going again. The logs hiss and crackle, a cheerful sound in an otherwise frozen morning. The kettle goes back onto the iron hook. The kitchen begins to thaw, one slow breath at a time. Breakfast is simple. Porridge, maybe. A handful of oats boiled in water, stirred slowly with a stick. You add a spoon of honey, rare, precious, and slightly crystallized. The sweetness cuts through the blandness perfectly. In the 18th century, oats were considered a peasant food, something the rich wouldn't touch unless disguised with milk and spices. Ironically, centuries later, it's now sold in fancy cafes as overnight oats for triple the price. History is nothing if not hilariously circular. You stir slowly, watching the mixture thicken. The texture turns creamy, the scent slightly nutty. You pour it into a wooden bowl and sit near the fire. The first bite is comfort incarnate. Simple, warm, and utterly sincere. You think about the people who cooked before you, the women who stirred pots before dawn, the men who chopped wood until their hands blistered. Each of them made this same meal, in their own quiet corners of history. A small continuity of warmth. There's something deeply human about eating the same food that someone did 200 years ago and feeling the same relief. It's like time doesn't fully separate us. It just hides in the folds of memory and smoke. Outside, a faint light grows in the east. The snow is less fierce today, but the cold remains a loyal companion. The world hums faintly. A cart will creaking somewhere far off. A rooster insisting it's brave, though it clearly isn't. You pull on your coat and step outside. The ground crunches under your boots, the kind of satisfying sound that makes you feel powerful in small, silly ways. The air bites at your nose, but your lungs feel clear. The village is still sleepy. A few distant chimneys send out thin ribbons of smoke, each one curling skyward like a quiet prayer. You wave at the blacksmith's apprentice, who's trying to thaw his hands by puffing on them. He waves back with a grin that says, "Yes, it's cold. Always is." You return to your kitchen, feeling oddly grateful. For the fire, for the smell of oats, for the quiet routine that holds everything together. And perhaps for the way winter, in its harshness, forces you to notice the small luxuries. The way a spoon feels warm, the way the firelight trembles on the floorboards, the way your breath turns visible and then disappears. Back inside, you pour another cup of herbal tea the same as last night. You sip it slowly, watching the steam curl like smoke signals. Maybe it's sending a message you'll never quite decode. Something simple. Maybe, "You're doing fine." You smile, because really you are. Tomorrow will bring its own frost, its own fire. But tonight, well, tonight you'll sleep in warmth and that's enough. You wake before dawn. Not because you're eager. No one in a winter kitchen ever wakes early out of enthusiasm. But because the air itself insists. It seeps in through the cracks, whispers across your skin, and says, It's time. You groan, stretch, and immediately regret moving. The air is icy enough that your breath looks like a cloud that forgot its way home. The coals have gone out completely this time, leaving only a ghost of smoke that smells faintly of charred wood and sleep. You wrap a shawl around your shoulders, shuffle across the floor, and begin the ancient, noble ritual of coaxing fire from nothing. Flint, steel, and patience, the holy trinity of survival. You strike once, twice, then again. Sparks fly and vanish. You mutter something that is, spiritually speaking, a small prayer and a mild complaint. Finally, the tiniest flicker catches. You lean close, shielding it with your hands, and blow gently until it grows into a fragile orange tongue. The flame wobbles, deciding if you're worthy. You whisper, "Come on, you're doing great," as though encouraging a nervous friend at karaoke. It works. The fire blooms. The room begins to glow. You sit back, watching as the darkness retreats into corners. There's something primal in that moment. The relief of light returning, of warmth finding its way home again. Outside, the world is a pale blue hush. Snow clings to rooftops like frosting. The sky hasn't quite committed to morning yet. You pour a little water into a pot and set it above the flame. The sizzle of contact feels alive. You toss in a few dried lentils, a piece of onion, and a pinch of salt. It's not much, but it's something, and in winter, something is practically a feast. As the pot simmers, you think of the kitchens of the past. Roman hearths blackened by centuries of smoke. Viking longhouses with central fires and ceiling holes that let out just enough smoke to keep people barely conscious. In the Middle Ages, the kitchen was a separate building entirely, mostly to prevent the main house from catching fire, which, statistically speaking, it still often did. Your humble corner feels suddenly part of that long lineage of cooks, all united by the universal complaint, "Why won't this wood catch?" A small historical fact drifts into your mind, something you once heard in passing. In 14th century England, cooks working in great manors were called turnbroaches, named after the long iron rods used to roast meat. Some of these rods were turned not by humans, but by specially bred turnspit dogs, tiny, muscular creatures that ran on hamster wheel-like devices beside the hearth. You pause, stirring your lentils, and imagine it. A small, determined dog jogging endlessly to roast a chicken, the medieval equivalent of a treadmill desk job. The smell of food deepens. It's humble but rich, the scent of survival itself. You sit by the window, bowl in hand, watching the sky brighten into gold. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolls. The sound rolls across the snow, gentle and heavy. For a moment, you think of how people used to mark time not by clocks but by sound, bells, roosters, footsteps, wind. There's something slower, more forgiving about that. Clocks are impatient things. Bells at least echo for a while. You take another bite, the warmth spreading through your chest. Historians still debate whether the medieval kitchen was considered a place of drudgery or of quiet creativity. Probably both. After all, any space where fire and hunger meet tends to be complicated. You glance at the fire again, smiling faintly. Complicated or not, it's yours. Outside, the world begins to stir. Footsteps crunch. Doors open. Somewhere, someone curses the cold in a language that transcends centuries. You finish your meal, feeling oddly triumphant. You've survived another morning. Fire 1, winter 0. By mid-morning, the light turns silver. You step outside, bundled in layers that make you feel like a very determined onion. The snow has settled into soft dunes along the path, and your footprints trail behind you like quiet punctuation marks. You're heading to the market, or what passes for half a dozen stalls, a few wagons, and a suspicious-looking chicken with escape plans. The air smells of wood smoke and cold bread. You can hear someone chopping wood nearby, each strike echoing like a heartbeat. At the first stall, an old woman sells roots, carrots, parsnips, turnips, all slightly dirt-streaked, all impossibly precious. You choose a few, trading a small wedge of cheese and a handful of dried herbs. Barter still feels better than coin. It's an exchange of stories as much as goods. You continue wandering, picking up a bit of salt, a small jar of rendered fat, and, because you can't resist, a bruised apple that looks like it's seen things. Back home, you set your treasures on the table. The roots look unassuming, but you know they'll transform in the pot. A humble stew, the kind that smells like patience and tastes like history. You peel the vegetables slowly, rhythmically. The sound of the knife against wood is oddly comforting. A gentle scrape that feels like thinking made audible. You chop, stir, season. The fire pops approvingly, as though applauding your effort. The stew begins to simmer. You lean over the pot, inhaling the scent of earth and smoke and salt. It's simple food, but simplicity has its own kind of luxury. You remember reading once about the Russian pechka, a massive brick stove used for both cooking and sleeping. People would lie on top of it at night, letting the residual warmth seep into their bones. Some even believed it could heal illness. You wonder if anyone ever wrote poetry about that stove. Probably not, but they should have. The sound of bubbling broth fills the room. You stir lazily, half hypnotized. Steam curls upward, painting the air in soft, swirling ghosts. Outside, a neighbor's child laughs, chasing something unseen. The sound drifts in through the crack under the door, a reminder that life continues, even in the coldest months. You ladle out the stew, take a spoonful and close your eyes. The taste is deep, honest, grounding, like the earth itself decided to be kind for a day. As you eat, your mind wanders to stranger corners of history. Did you know that in some parts of ancient China, people cooked meals by placing clay pots inside piles of hot ashes? Essentially the earliest form of a slow cooker? The technique was called tanhua, and it produced tender, smoky dishes that took all day to finish. The patience of that makes you smile. Humans, it seems, have always been slow cooking something somewhere. Historians still debate exactly when the first dedicated stove appeared. Some claim it was in the 3rd century BCE. Others argue it was much later. The truth, like most good stews, is probably somewhere in the middle. You finish your meal and set the bowl aside, feeling the comfortable heaviness of warmth and food. The wind outside has softened. The world seems to hum quietly, a low, contented vibration beneath the cold. You lean back, eyes half closed, and think of the simplest truth of all. Fire may be fragile, fleeting, fickle, but it's also faithful. It always returns, even after the darkest night. The spoon slips from your hand. You let it, because for now, it's enough just to sit here, listening to the quiet boil of a life well lived. You wake to the sound of dripping. At first, it's so gentle you think it's part of a dream, some slow, rhythmic sound deep inside your mind. But then you open your eyes, and you see it. A single drop of water falling from the roof beam into a bucket, again and again. Meltwater. The world outside must be softening. You stretch beneath your blanket and notice the air feels a degree less cruel. The frost on the window glows faintly gold, as if sunlight is sneaking back after a long argument with winter. You smile a little. You dress, layering wool upon wool until you resemble a small, mobile haystack. The fire from last night still holds a stubborn heart of red, so you feed it a few chips of wood, blow softly, and watch it reignite. The pot on the hearth still smells faintly of last night's stew. Herbs, earth, and smoke. You pour a bit of water into it, scrape the bottom, and make what generations before you have called breakfast soup. It's not glamorous, but it's warm. You sit with the bowl between your hands and think about kitchens across time. In ancient Rome, winter kitchens were often built underground to trap heat. In 16th century France, wealthy households hired men called écuyers de cuisine whose entire job was to supervise how slowly things cooked. Imagine that, being paid to make sure the soup doesn't boil too soon. The dream. You take a sip. It's better than it has any right to be. Outside, you hear boots crunching. A knock at the door follows. 2 quick raps, polite but firm. You open it to find a neighbor wrapped in a wool cloak, her nose red from the cold. She's holding a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "Trade?" she asks. Inside, she unwraps it. Dried apples and a small clay pot of honey. In exchange, you offer a loaf of bread and a sliver of cheese. It's the kind of silent barter that has kept humans civil for centuries. As she leaves, she glances at your fire. "Keep it alive," she says with a grin. "It's all we've got." You nod, and somehow those words feel heavier than they should. You sit by the fire, drizzling a bit of honey into your tea. It melts like gold, swirling slowly. The taste is sunlight pretending to be sweet. There's something timeless about this exchange of warmth, fire, food, kindness. Historians may debate dates and dynasties, but the real story of winter kitchens has always been this: the quiet persistence of people refusing to freeze. You think of medieval cookbooks, the kind that survived not because anyone meant them to, but because parchment is stubborn. One, from 1390, called the For Me of Curry, includes recipes for things like apple moy, a kind of apple pudding, and sauce noit, a sauce made from ground nuts and wine. No one knows exactly what half the instructions mean anymore. Boil until done isn't as precise as it sounds. Historians still debate whether medieval people ate better or worse than we do now. Probably both. They didn't have instant noodles, but they did have honey-roasted quail, so let's call it even. The rest of the day drifts by in a slow rhythm. Chopping wood, mending a glove, feeding the fire. You catch yourself humming an old tune, something you don't even remember learning. Maybe it came with the wind. By evening, the light fades again. You sit near the window, watching snowflakes dance like ash, falling soft as breath. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howls. A lonely sound, not frightening, just ancient. You whisper, "Tomorrow will be warmer," to no one in particular, and though it might be a lie, it feels good to say it aloud. Morning again. This time, you wake to light. Real, golden, honest light spilling through the frost-streaked window. It touches the edges of the room, catching on the kettle, the ladle, the old wooden spoon you've been meaning to replace for 3 winters but never do. The fire has burned low, but the air feels different. The ice on the eaves outside is dripping, steady and musical. Somewhere nearby, a bird sings one clear note, hesitant, but hopeful. You smile. The world, it seems, has decided to thaw. You sweep the hearth, tidy the table, and take stock of what you have. A little flour, a pinch of salt, the last of the honey, a few scraps of butter. Enough for pancakes if you stretch the definition of pancake far enough. You mix the dough slowly, the wooden spoon creaking against the bowl. The smell of browning flour fills the air. You drizzle a bit of honey over the top and listen to it hiss softly where it touches the pan. As the batter sizzles, you think about how people in the far north, places where winter lasted 8 months, used to make ice bread. Not a contradiction, but a technique. Flat cakes cooked on frozen stones over a small flame, crisped on one side, barely warmed through. They called it snow cake. It was meant to last days. Your pancakes are much better, you decide smugly. You eat them slowly, the honey thick and golden on your tongue. The warmth from the fire mingles with the faint sweetness. It's not luxury, not exactly, but it's enough to feel alive. You pull on your boots and step outside. The world is bright and wet. The snow has begun to shrink, revealing patches of brown earth and the first stubborn green shoots of something unnamed. The air smells like water and wood smoke. You close your eyes, tilt your face toward the sun, and let it touch you. Somewhere in the distance, smoke curls from another chimney. You imagine other people in other kitchens, performing the same small rituals, rekindling fires, stirring pots, making dew. You remember what your neighbor said, keep it alive, and you understand now that she didn't just mean the flame. Later, as you sit by the fire again, the day folds itself quietly around you. The kettle hums. The spoon rests on the edge of the pot. You write a few lines on a scrap of parchment, a recipe of sorts. Take what's left. Add warmth. Stir slowly. Share if possible. Historians still debate who wrote the first cookbook, but whoever it was, they must have known it wasn't really about food. Recipes are just instructions for keeping hope warm. You close your eyes. The fire crackles. The room smells like smoke and sweetness. Tomorrow maybe you'll bake bread. Maybe you'll trade again. Maybe the world will turn another degree toward light. For now, you sit quietly, breathing in the soft rhythm of your small kitchen. The winter outside might not be done yet, but in here warmth has already won. You wake before dawn again, though this time not because of cold. It's a habit now. The rhythm of winter mornings has woven itself into your bones. The house is quiet, the fire a soft red sigh in the dark. The air tastes faintly of ash and sleep. You stretch, pull the blanket tighter, and listen. The first sound is the distant murmur of melting ice. The second is your own breath. And the third, faint but there, is a rooster somewhere down the road, announcing that, yes, even now the world insists on starting again. You stir the embers, coaxing flame from memory. The logs crackle, light grows, and the room takes on its familiar glow, the same amber hue that's lit kitchens for centuries. The light doesn't just chase away darkness. It paints over it, slow and patient, like a brush across a worn canvas. Breakfast today is porridge. Not the kind from storybooks with golden curls and bears, but the real kind, thick, grainy, practical. You stir it with a wooden spoon that has outlived several spoons before it. You add a little salt, a little honey, and, because the world feels generous this morning, a few dried apple slices from your trade. You eat it slowly, standing by the window. The snow outside has retreated into the corners, hiding in the shadows where the sun can't quite reach. But the air smells different, wet, earthy, alive. And in that moment, you realize something quietly miraculous. You've survived another winter. Not conquered it, no one conquers winter, but outlasted it. You laugh softly to yourself, the kind of laugh that sounds like an exhale. Somewhere, in a warmer century, someone might call that optimism. You think of how people before you celebrated the slow return of warmth. In medieval Europe, kitchens would open their windows for the first time in months. letting out the smoke that had turned ceilings black. They called it airing the hearth, and it was both a chore and a ritual, a way to remind the home that light could still enter. You decide to do the same. You open the shutters. The cold rushes in, biting your skin, but the freshness feels like a promise. Historians still debate when humans first began associating fire with comfort rather than fear. Some say it was prehistoric. Others think it took civilization and a good chimney to make it feel safe. Either way, the truth is simple. The flame in the hearth is as much about peace as it is about heat. You sip tea and look at the light stretching across the floor. You could almost fall asleep standing here, the way one might drift while watching waves. The rest of the day drifts quietly. You knead dough for bread, slow and meditative. The flour puffs into the air like snowfall, coating your fingers. The smell is soft and ancient, grain and warmth, mixed with patience. You set it near the fire to rise, cover it with a cloth, and think about how bread has always been humanity's most patient invention. Later, while waiting, you sit with your journal again. You draw a little sketch of your kitchen, the crooked stool, the cracked mug, the uneven floorboards. You label them as though they were rare artifacts. Specimen A, the chair that complains. Specimen B, the table that has seen too much soup. A small joke, yes, but it makes you smile. Outside, the sun climbs higher. The snow turns into slush. A bird hops onto the window ledge and pecks curiously at the frost. For the first time in months, you open the door without dread. And the air that greets you, oh, it smells like possibility. You step out, stretch, and let the light fall across your face. Somewhere far away, bells ring faintly. Church bells, maybe, or just the sound of metal shifting in the thaw. Either way, you take it as a sign. It's going to be a gentler season. Afternoon. The bread has risen beautifully. Not perfect, of course. Perfection doesn't belong in a kitchen this small, but beautifully enough. It's cracked slightly on one side, uneven on the other, but it smells divine. Warm yeast and browned crust, the scent that has made countless winters bearable. You pull it from the oven and set it on the table. The sound of crust cracking as it cools is one of life's underrated lullabies. You tear a small piece, butter it with what's left of your ration, and let it melt in your mouth. It's soft and rich and impossibly comforting. You chew slowly, eyes half closed. For a moment, time doesn't exist. Somewhere in your mind, you drift into stories again. You remember reading that during the Great Frost of 1709, families across Europe used ovens not just for baking but for sleeping. They'd wrap themselves in blankets and rest near the warm stones after bread came out, calling it the baker's hour. You smile at that. Humanity's creativity shines brightest when it's freezing. Outside, the day brightens further. The trees are dripping. The snow is shrinking so quickly that it hisses when touched by sunlight. You decide to tidy your kitchen, a spring ritual in disguise. You sweep away ashes, wipe down the table, and restack the woodpile. The sound of sweeping feels rhythmic, like a quiet song. Under the hearthstone, you find a few crumbs of old charcoal and one small button, blackened with soot. You wonder who it belonged to. A traveler, perhaps, who once warmed their hands here before moving on. You set it on the windowsill, an unintentional memorial to all the anonymous souls who've shared heat before you. Historians still debate what early kitchens smelled like. Most agree it was a mix of smoke, herbs, sweat, and the slow alchemy of survival. Whatever it was, it must have been familiar, a kind of comfort hidden inside chaos. You sit down again, light a candle, and take out a small piece of cloth. You begin mending your old mittens, the needle dipping in and out of fabric like a slow heartbeat. The act itself feels ancient, one of those quiet labors that has linked people across centuries. And then, in the flicker of candlelight, you remember something small but important. The way your grandmother used to say, "A winter kitchen isn't about food. It's about keeping company with the fire." You look at the flame now, dancing with a kind of lazy joy, and you understand exactly what she meant. Evening settles softly. The light fades, and the fire grows more golden by contrast. You pour a bit of warm milk into your cup, stir in the last of the honey, and let the sweetness coat your throat. Outside, the wind sighs one last time, as if reluctant to leave. The house creaks in response, a conversation between two old friends. You look at the bread again, at the half-empty cup, at the glow of the coals. This is enough, you think. This has always been enough. Tomorrow you might venture farther. Perhaps visit the neighbor again, perhaps find something new to cook. But tonight, you're content to sit beside the steady hum of your winter kitchen, surrounded by the smell of bread and the whisper of the fire. And as you drift toward sleep, one last thought crosses your mind. Even in the coldest months, the human heart always finds a stove. Morning again, soft and pale as butter. You wake to a quiet you didn't expect. No whistling wind, no creaking beams. Just silence. That strange, full-bodied silence that feels alive, like the world is holding its breath. You stretch, rub your eyes, and realize the light looks different. It's warmer, gentler, almost golden, the kind of light that only comes after a long season of gray. You shuffle toward the door, open it slowly, and there it is, the first true morning of spring. The snow hasn't vanished, not completely. It lingers in corners, shy and stubborn, but the air smells of thawing earth and wet wood. Somewhere, a bird is actually trying out a song, haltingly like it forgot the lyrics. You smile. It's the first sound of new life you've heard in weeks. You turn back to your kitchen, your sanctuary, your battlefield, your furnace of survival. It looks softer now in this light. The soot on the hearth glows amber. The iron pots gleam faintly. You almost feel sorry for the fire, for how small and unneeded it suddenly seems. You set water to boil. The flame crackles politely, perhaps sensing it's no longer the star of the show. Steam curls upward, and for a moment you think about how humans have been doing this exact thing for thousands of years, coaxing warmth out of flame, out of patience. Somewhere in the ruins of Pompeii, archaeologists found kitchens almost identical to yours. Clay stoves, soot stains, cooking pots blackened by time. Historians still debate whether ancient Romans ate breakfast regularly. Some say only the laborers did, while the upper classes preferred to fast until noon. Either way, someone somewhere was always making tea or porridge before the sun was fully up. You take that first sip of warmth the way others might take a prayer. The heat slips down your throat and fills you with something like memory. The quiet joy of being alive in a world that's thawing. You decide to clean the hearth properly this time. It's a symbolic act, yes, but also practical. You sweep away the gray ashes, scrape the grate, and wipe down the edges. The stone beneath looks lighter than you remember, like it's been waiting under there all along, patient through the cold. You think about all the people who've done this before you. In the 14th century, women in English villages would scrub the hearth with wet sand every spring, a ritual called sanding the house. It wasn't just cleaning, it was renewal, a quiet exorcism of winter. You smile at the thought, feeling a small kinship with them. They, too, must have felt that first whisper of relief, that sense of "we made it," As the fire burns lower, you sit by the window with a scrap of paper and begin to sketch again. This time you draw not the kitchen, but the view. The dripping eaves, the muddy road, the faint outlines of buds on the trees. You label it Day 1, after the cold. A small laugh escapes you, not quite joyful, not quite tired, just human. Then, because habits die hard, you turn to the kettle, refill it, and make another cup of tea. Some rituals deserve to last forever. Afternoon brings a kind of restless quiet. You've grown so used to the rhythm of winter, the tending, the waiting, the surviving, that warmth feels suspicious. The air smells too clean. The floorboards don't creak as much. The fire hardly needs your attention at all. You try to busy yourself. A stew, perhaps. You cut a few vegetables, slice the remaining dried meat, and toss everything into a pot. The scent fills the room. Thyme, onion, smoke, and suddenly it smells like the idea of comfort itself. You sit back, let it simmer, and watch dust float in the sunlight. Each speck drifts slowly, weightless and aimless, like it's forgotten how gravity works. It's oddly hypnotic. You remember reading once that early kitchens often had holes in the ceiling, not skylights but vents for smoke. Before chimneys became common in the 12th century, entire homes would simply live with smoke. It clung to everything, clothes, walls, lungs, and yet people didn't complain much. They said it preserved the rafters. A nice way to justify slow suffocation, perhaps. You glance up at your own ceiling and wonder if your ancestors would think your modern chimney made you soft. Probably. But you'll take soft lungs over preserved rafters. Thank you very much. You step outside again while the stew simmers. The ground is muddy and slick. You walk carefully, shoes sinking slightly into the earth. A few neighbors wave from a distance, bundled in coats still, but their faces open with something like hope. You wave back, realizing you haven't seen most of them since before the heavy snows. Winter tends to turn everyone into hermits, by necessity or by design. You head back in, greeted by the smell of simmering stew. You stir it slowly, the spoon scraping softly against the pot. You taste it, a little flat. You add salt, maybe too much, but then again you deserve a little excess. As the stew thickens, you find yourself thinking of kitchens across the ages again. There's something humbling about it. How every civilization, no matter how grand, always circles back to the same basic truth. Warmth, food, and a place to share it. You recall one obscure tidbit. In ancient Korea, families believed their hearth spirit, Joangsan, watched over the kitchen. Before major meals, they'd whisper small thanks into the smoke, hoping to keep her pleased. You imagine her, stern, soot-covered, unimpressed by undercooked stew, and smile. Historians still debate how much of those old rituals were about belief versus habit. But in the quiet glow of your fire, you find yourself thinking that maybe it doesn't matter. Faith, habit, tradition, they all come from the same place. The wish for something warm to stay. Evening falls softly again. You ladle out the stew into a cracked bowl, tear a bit of leftover bread, and sit down. The spoon clinks gently. The fire hums. Outside, the last of the snow melts from the roof and drips onto the earth, slow and steady. You close your eyes, listening. You've lived through the kind of cold that makes your breath visible and your thoughts small. Now here you are, still breathing, still hungry, still human. And as you take another slow bite, you think, maybe the real luxury was never fire at all. Maybe it was the quiet that came with it. The next morning, the world smells of wet wood and ash. You wake slowly, wrapped in that half-dreaming state where time feels syrupy and everything sounds slightly underwater. Somewhere, a sparrow is shouting about something, probably joy, but you can't be sure. Birds tend to exaggerate. You drag yourself up, light the hearth again, and wait for the crackle. There's something soothing about that first spark, the way it flares like a secret handshake between you and the ancient world. You toss in a few splinters of birch, then sit on the stool, hands cupped around a chipped mug, watching smoke curl toward the ceiling. You think, not for the first time, how miraculous it is that this little flame, this ordinary, obedient fire, is both your servant and your ruler. Too weak and you shiver. Too strong and it eats your house. And yet, it's been the same equation for millennia. You recall reading once that early firewood was carefully rationed, even ranked. In some medieval towns, the best hardwoods like oak were reserved for bread ovens or the wealthy, while softwoods like pine were considered poor fire. Pine burns bright and fast, the show-off of the wood world, but leaves little heat behind. You smile, thinking how even fire had a class system once. The kettle begins to hum. You pour water over dried leaves, inhale the steam, and think about what it means to live in a place that remembers winter so vividly. The walls still smell of smoke. The windows wear faint frost scars. The wooden spoon on your counter has a burn mark you'll never sand out. You decide not to. Souvenirs are important, even for kitchens. Outside, a light wind rattles the shutters. You think you might go for a walk today, maybe see how the river looks now that it's free of ice. But for now, you just sit there and breathe, letting the fire's rhythm sync with your own heartbeat. A strange fact drifts into your mind. In 17th century Paris, kitchen maids' fingers became a common ailment among servants who cooked through the winter. The cold would swell their hands until they cracked and bled, but they kept stirring, kept chopping. Some rubbed their hands with goose fat for protection, others with wine vinegar. Neither worked well, but at least it smelled fancy. Historians still debate whether this was due more to class neglect or climate, a polite academic way of saying, probably both. You finish your tea, the bottom gritty with stray leaves, and chuckle quietly. There's something both sad and beautiful about all this, how humanity has always, somehow, made do. You glance toward the small jar of salt, the hanging herbs, the soot-darkened spoon, and it occurs to you, survival isn't always heroic. Sometimes it's just domestic. The fire sighs. You stand, stretch, and whisper, half to the air, half to yourself. You did well, old friend. Then, just to be safe, you add, don't get cocky. By mid-afternoon, the thaw feels complete. The air, once hard and brittle, now tastes faintly of mud and sap. You open the window, cautiously, as though you're not entirely sure the outside world still works, and a small rush of wind slips through, smelling of rain and moss. The fire flickers uncertainly in this new warmth. You don't need it, strictly speaking, but the silence without it feels wrong, like a play missing its narrator. So you keep it lit, just small, a whisper of flame, a memory of survival. You take inventory of your supplies, mostly out of habit. The salted meat is nearly gone. The onions are sprouting hopeful green shoots. You have a single piece of hard cheese left, which, judging by its scent, has developed something resembling a personality. Still edible, though. Probably. You find yourself thinking about kitchens that didn't have even this much. In the harsh winters of 19th century Russia, peasants would sometimes cook with imagination, warming snow and adding pine bark just to have something to chew. Some used rye husks to thicken soups. Others roasted acorns to stretch out bread flour. You close your eyes, trying to imagine that taste. Bitter, smoky, stubborn. The taste of people who refused to stop existing. You stir the small flame again, half out of guilt. We have it easy, you murmur. And then, as the day drifts on, you find yourself reaching for your notebook again. Not to sketch this time, but to write. You describe the fire, the smells, the way the light slides across the counter like honey. You even note the sound of melting snow outside, drip, 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 like a slow clock you don't mind listening to. You don't know who you're writing for. Maybe no one. Maybe someone 100 winters from now who'll find this page and wonder what warmth used to sound like. You pause, then add a line that feels like truth. We built our comfort from the same thing that almost killed us. A few centuries ago, in northern Scotland, families would light something called a peat watch, a small ember left glowing overnight to guard the house. The first person to wake would feed it gently, coaxing it back into flame. It wasn't just tradition. It was community written in firelight. Historians still debate whether this was practical or spiritual, but you suspect it was both. After all, warmth is never just physical. You close the notebook, feeling unexpectedly peaceful. Outside, the bird is back, the same one from this morning, still shouting about whatever it is birds find urgent. Maybe food, maybe joy, maybe both. You laugh softly. Then, with one last glance at the embering hearth, you murmur, "Sleep if you want. I'll wake you when it snows again." Evening drifts in quietly, the way it always does. Not like a curtain falling, but like ink slowly soaking through paper. You light the lamp, watch the flame stutter once, twice, and then settle into that buttery glow that makes the whole kitchen feel like it's breathing again. The hearth hums softly, a half-awake companion. You add another piece of wood, more out of affection than necessity. The sound it makes, that small hiss and sigh, feels like an old friend muttering, "Still here." You look around the room. Every surface carries a story now. The cutting board is crosshatched with knife marks. The copper pot reflects light like an old coin. The window, streaked with condensation, shows your reflection faintly, as though you exist only halfway between this century and the last. You pick up an onion, turn it in your hand. Funny thing, in medieval Europe, onions weren't just for cooking. People rubbed them on their skin to keep warm. Though science, as always, refused to cooperate, still it must have been worth a try. Anything to hold onto warmth that didn't cost another log of firewood. You slice it slowly, rhythmically. Each cut is a whisper, a beat in the room's heartbeat. You think about how many winters people have stood like this, at wooden tables, slicing, stirring, humming under their breath. If you listen closely, you can almost hear them, those echoes across time. The girl in 15th century Norway singing to herself while stirring porridge. The baker's apprentice in a cold London alley, blowing on his hands before touching the dough. You laugh under your breath. And here I am, with central heating a switch away, still babysitting a flame. There's something grounding about that, a small rebellion against the modern world's impatience. You pour the onions into a pan, add a knob of butter that hisses in approval. The smell that rises is deep, golden, sleepy. You feel your shoulders drop an inch. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barks once and then gives up. You let the onions caramelize slowly, stirring every few minutes, the spoon tracing lazy circles like someone drawing constellations in syrup. You think about all those other fires, from hearths to campfires to temple flames, and realize humanity's been telling itself bedtime stories by firelight for as long as stories have existed. That's the historical fact here, if you care to note it. Fire wasn't just about cooking. It was civilization's first theater. Every flicker was a scene, every shadow a character. Around it, language evolved, myths were born, and, let's be honest, so were most awkward family arguments. You lean on the counter and whisper, "Well, it's still working." The smell in the room now is rich enough to make time itself feel slower. You toss in a handful of herbs, thyme, maybe not because you need them, but because they make the room smell like patience. You take one deep breath, another. The lamp light dances over the walls, turning the edges of your world soft. Then you say it aloud, to no one in particular. "Not bad. For a world that once thought warmth was a luxury." The night deepens, and with it comes that hush, that rare silence only found in winter kitchens after the fire has burned low. You can hear everything now. The faint creak of the rafters, the whisper of your own breath, the tiny pops from the cooling logs, like little sighs of satisfaction. You pour yourself another cup of tea, the dregs of what's left. It's gone lukewarm, but you drink it anyway. Warmth, you've learned, isn't always about temperature. The world outside is sleeping under a pale sheet of moonlight. Through the window, the snow looks like spilled flour, and the trees stand like burnt matchsticks against the silver sky. Somewhere in that stillness you sense a rhythm. The same rhythm that's guided every cook, every hearthkeeper, every dreamer who's watched a flame fade to embers and felt that tiny ache of gratitude. You smile softly. "We've all been here," you murmur. "Every winter, every century." You think of one of your favorite obscure facts. In 18th century Finland, people kept small firestones, called tulikivi, near their beds. These were heated in the hearth during the day and carried to bed wrapped in cloth at night. Portable warmth, ancient luxury. Some say this practice inspired early hot water bottles centuries later. Others think it was just another case of clever peasants refusing to freeze. Historians still debate whether the stones were purely practical or also carried a ritual meaning, perhaps believed to guard against winter spirits. You'd like to think it was both. A bit of science, a bit of superstition, the human mix that never quite changes. You lean back in your chair and close your eyes for a moment. The room hums softly. The lamp flickers. Everything slows. You imagine the same room 200 years ago. Different hands, same gestures. Someone stirring a pot. Someone whispering a lullaby near the fire. Someone looking at the same window, watching snow fall in the same pattern, thinking almost the same thoughts. That's the quiet truth of it, isn't it? We're not so different. We still chase the same comforts, still build warmth where we can, still fear the same cold that used to lurk just beyond the door. You chuckle gently. Progress, you say to the flame, just means we found fancier ways to miss the old ones. A final coal cracks, sending up a small flare of light before folding back into ash. You watch it fade, the orange turning to gray, the glow melting into the shadows. And as your eyelids grow heavier, you whisper, "Good night, winter kitchen. You've done enough for one lifetime." You wake, not from sleep, exactly, but from that half-dream where sound and warmth become one long memory. The hearth is low again. The embers pulse faintly, red at their core, soft as heartbeats. You pull the shawl tighter around your shoulders and let the stillness greet you like an old friend. It's morning or close enough. Pale light spills through the window, the kind of winter dawn that never quite commits to being day. You can smell last night's ashes, that faint, sweet, earthy scent of wood turned to dust. There's comfort in that, somehow, the evidence of warmth, the proof that you made it through another night. You move slowly, not out of laziness but reverence. Everything feels sacred before the first sound breaks the quiet. The spoon, the kettle, the chill of the table beneath your fingertips. You fill the pot again, pour water with care, and watch steam curl like small ghosts escaping. They rise and vanish near the ceiling, and for a brief moment, you think of all the generations who have done the same. Every morning, every winter, since fire first learned our names. You smile softly at the thought. We've all boiled the same water, you murmur. Here's your historical fact of the day. In medieval Europe, kitchens weren't just for cooking. They were the heart of the home, both literally and socially. The fire provided warmth, light, and a place for storytelling. Most homes had only one hearth, and everything, cooking, sewing, gossiping, dreaming, happened around it. Families slept as close to the hearth as safety allowed. It was life's gravitational center, and yet not everyone had the luxury of constant fire. Maintaining a flame through winter was a daily act of faith. If it went out, rekindling it meant effort. Flint, tinder, patience, and sometimes a neighbor's generosity. People even carried coals wrapped in moss from house to house, sharing warmth like a sacred gift. You wonder what that would feel like, knocking on a door and saying, "Could I borrow a bit of your fire?" There's something beautiful in that kind of dependency, fragile but kind. You lift the kettle as it begins to hum, and pour yourself a cup. The sound of tea hitting ceramic is small but deeply satisfying. Outside, a cart creaks down the frozen road. Someone starting their own day, the rhythm of life repeating itself endlessly. You wrap both hands around your cup and let the heat seep into your skin. And then, almost without meaning to, you laugh softly. The winter kitchen, where tea is sacred, and time moves slower than porridge. Somewhere, far away, a clock strikes, faint, muffled. The world resumes its turning. But in here, in this tiny kitchen that feels like it's floating in its own century, you decide to stay a bit longer. You lean against the counter, sip again, and let the taste carry you through the quiet. The kettle sighs once more, as though agreeing with you. Later that day, the weather begins to turn. The air thickens, that peculiar heaviness that promises snow. You can smell it before it comes. Clean, cold, metallic, like the pause before a thought finishes forming. You add more wood to the fire and sit close, listening to the crackle. There's a kind of magic in this waiting, a ritual of small movements. Adjusting a log, straightening a pot, checking the draft near the door. It's not about doing much, but about being here, about tending the ordinary. You glance toward the window again. The first flakes appear. A slow drift, then a shimmer, then thousands of tiny white threads stitching the sky shut. The world beyond begins to blur, and the sound of everything else fades under that soft, steady hush that only snow can make. It feels almost unreal, a painting that someone forgot to finish. You reach for a loaf of bread, old but not yet hard. Slice it gently. The crust crumbles just enough to scatter crumbs across the table. You think about all those kitchens through history where bread was the whole meal, where every crumb mattered, where waste was a kind of sin. That's the historical note for this chapter. In colder centuries, bread wasn't just food. It was currency, medicine, and metaphor. Peasants paid taxes in grain. Doctors prescribed it for stomach ailments. Priests blessed it as sacred. In some places, it was even believed that stale bread could predict the weather hardening or softening with the air's humidity. Historians still debate whether that was superstition or primitive meteorology, but you can't help but smile. Humans have always wanted signs from the simplest things. You spread a bit of honey on the bread. It gleams in the firelight, that deep amber glow. The taste is sweet, ancient. Bees, after all, have been your unseen collaborators for millennia. You eat slowly, almost ceremonially. The snow outside grows heavier. The world beyond your window disappears entirely, and for a moment, it feels as though your kitchen is the only room left in existence. You whisper, "So this is what eternity sounds like." Then, the tiniest sound interrupts it. A drip from the kettle, a sigh from the fire, a memory of footsteps from long ago. You glance around, half expecting to see someone. A figure from another century perhaps, hunched over this same fire, sharing your bread, your silence, your strange comfort in the cold. But there's no one, of course. Just you, and the kitchen, and the steady rhythm of snow falling beyond the glass. You lean back, close your eyes, and feel the warmth seep deeper into your bones. The logs crack softly, and time folds in on itself, as if all winters have become one. And with a soft, sleepy grin, you murmur, maybe fire wasn't a luxury after all. Maybe it was the world's first lullaby. The night returns with its usual quiet authority. Snow presses against the windows like a soft, slow-moving tide, and the fire hums its familiar tune low, steady, content to exist without effort. You sit close again, wrapped in your shawl, watching the light play tricks on the walls. The shadows sway like dancers, thin, graceful silhouettes that appear and vanish in rhythm with the fire's breath. Somewhere deep in the room, the air creaks, the sound of wood remembering warmth. You stir the last of your stew and let your mind wander. The scent fills the air. Onions, roots, a bit of meat from a few days ago. Simple but somehow complete. The kind of meal that makes silence feel full. Tonight, the world feels smaller and safer for it. No horses clattering outside, no distant voices. Just the occasional crack from the hearth and the whisper of snow shifting on the roof. You tilt your head and wonder how people did this centuries ago, when every spark, every log, every ember had to be earned. You imagine a medieval cook leaning close to her fire, squinting against the smoke, muttering that if the stew burned again, she'd throw the pot into the river. You smile. Some things never change. And here's your historical fact. In the Middle Ages, kitchens weren't only smoky, they were dangerous. Open flames met wooden beams, straw floors, and billowing skirts. Fires could spread through whole villages in a single gust of wind. Many towns required that all household fires be extinguished at night, save for one or two guarded hearths in stone buildings. Those would relight the town's flames come morning, a kind of communal sunrise. It's strange to think of fire as both savior and threat. Warmth and ruin side by side, depending on whether you blinked too slowly. You blow lightly over your bowl, the steam curling up like breath. There's comfort in the ritual, cooking as survival, as art, as patience. You dip bread in the stew and watch the broth soak in, turning gold in the glow. An old superstition drifts into your thoughts. Something you once read. Never stir your stew counterclockwise, or winter will last forever. You glance at your spoon, amused, then deliberately swirl it backward just to see if the universe is paying attention. Nothing happens, of course. But still, you glance at the window, half expecting the snow to pause, reconsider, and then fall harder in protest. Historians still debate whether people really believed such things or if it was simply a way to give meaning to repetition, a charm against monotony. Either way, you understand it now. Winter is long. You talk to your food, your fire, your ceiling beams, anything that listens. Outside, the snow keeps falling. Inside, you eat slowly, gratefully. The fire breathes. The shadows dance. And somewhere, beneath all of it, a feeling grows. Not quite joy, but something gentler. The deep, unspoken satisfaction of being warm in a cold world. You finish your stew and whisper, "Another day survived." And the fire answers with a single, quiet pop. Agreement, perhaps, or applause. Morning again, or something that passes for it. The world is a blur of pale blue and white, light reflected from snow piled high against the windowsill. You stretch, yawn, and blink slowly into the chill. The fire's gone to sleep completely this time. The air bites. You move with purpose now, practice steps. Stir ashes. Add kindling. Blow gently until the faintest orange glow stirs to life. It's a tender moment, almost sacred, this negotiation with the elements. Fire, it seems, only agrees to return if you ask nicely. When it finally catches, you sit back on your heels, smiling. There you are, you whisper. Outside, a faint wind whistles between eaves. The winter's quiet gossip. Somewhere beyond the village, a church bell tolls, muffled by snow. You start breakfast. Not much left in the pantry now, but enough. Porridge, maybe. Water, oats, a bit of salt. You stir, patient and calm. There's comfort in this rhythm, in feeding yourself, in proving that the world hasn't stopped entirely. As it thickens, you look around the small kitchen. The pots, the broom, the faded herbs hanging from a rafter. Every object has the soft wear of familiarity, polished by use, by time, by hands now long gone. Here's your historical fact. In 18th and 19th century winters, kitchens were often the only consistently warm rooms in a house. Entire families would eat, talk, mend clothes, even sleep in them. Winter quarters, they called it, a phrase that sounds military but was mostly about comfort. Some kitchens even doubled as makeshift schools, where children learned letters by the hearth while parents baked bread. You stir your porridge and think. Perhaps that's what made winter bearable. Proximity. People gathering close, sharing breath and laughter, learning the art of coexistence. You take a bite. It's bland, but warm, and that's enough. On the far wall, a small frost pattern has formed, intricate, delicate, like lace. Nature's handwriting, invisible until the right light reveals it. You trace it with your eyes and think, not for the first time, how much beauty hides in the cold. You sigh softly, leaning back against the table. Maybe winter was just an excuse to slow down. And because you can't help yourself, you add with a smirk, or to justify eating porridge twice a day. The fire crackles approvingly. Somewhere deep within you, you feel that warmth again, the same ancient satisfaction shared by every soul who's ever coaxed flame from frost. You close your eyes and breathe it in. The faint taste of ash, the hum of the fire, the whisper of snow. And for a moment, the world feels timeless, as though all winters, all kitchens, all small acts of survival are one long, slow conversation between you and the past. The day wears on, and the kitchen becomes your entire universe. A sanctuary built from steam, soot, and slow hours. The window pane fogs. The light fades into that milky gray that's neither day nor night. You don't bother to correct it. The world can exist on its own schedule. You've got your own. The table is scattered with odds and ends. A half-burnt candle. A spoon with a crooked handle. The remains of a loaf so old it might qualify as an archaeological find. You stare at it with mild judgment. You again, You say under your breath. That's the thing about winter kitchens, they're alive. They creak, whisper, and settle. A wooden spoon resting in a bowl looks almost sentient in this light. You half expect it to sigh and ask for early retirement. You pour yourself water from a clay jug. It's cold enough to sting your teeth. You sip anyway. Somewhere outside, a cart will break through snow with a soft crunch. Someone braving the weather. You imagine them, bundled in layers, breath hanging in the air like speech bubbles without words. There's a calm defiance in living like this, in keeping a fire lit when everything else slows down. You decide to bake something, or at least pretend to. Flour, salt, water, and determination. The dough comes together reluctantly, but your hands remember. You need fold, wait. Here's your major historical fact. In early rural Europe, communal ovens were the lifeline of villages. Families brought dough to a single large oven, often built from stone or clay, to bake their weekly bread. It was both necessity and social event. Gossip and grain, laughter and heat, all needed together. The image comes easily. Women in shawls, children running barefoot, the smell of baking spreading across narrow lanes. A baker shouting over the noise, "Don't touch that loaf! It's for the widow!" Someone always pretending not to hear. You smile at the thought. The same warmth that binds you now once wrapped around entire communities. The same crackle of wood, the same stubborn faith in the fire. Your dough rises slowly under a damp cloth. You sit near the hearth again, spooning the last of last night's stew. It's colder now, thicker, but still good. The air hums with quiet, that perfect kind of silence where even your own thoughts seem polite. You notice the way smoke curls just under the chimney lip, forming delicate spirals like the tail of an animal too lazy to leave. A strange, cozy thought passes through your mind. What if the kitchen itself is alive? Breathing through the vents, blinking through the flickers of the flame. You whisper, "If you are, don't burn the bread." The fire crackles once, you decide that counts as a promise. Historians still debate whether early households saw their hearths as sacred beings or simple tools. But the rituals suggest reverence. People tossed in bits of food for the flame, whispered blessings to the ashes before bed. It wasn't worship exactly, more like gratitude, quiet and practical. And you understand that perfectly, because in this winter kitchen, where time moves slower than thought, you're not chasing warmth anymore. You're sharing it. The bread begins to smell faintly of something golden, hopeful, ancient. You close your eyes and let the scent fill you. It smells like patience. And you think perhaps that's the truest luxury of all. Evening descends without announcement. A slow dimming, a quieting of everything beyond the walls. The bread rests, cooling on the table. Its crust crackles faintly, like it's sighing with relief. You resist the urge to tear into it immediately. Barely. You light another candle instead. The flame trembles, throwing soft shadows across the room. The smell of wax blends with the lingering scent of baked bread, a pairing no perfume could rival. You tear a small piece at last and take a bite. It's rough, imperfect, but warm in that way that feels deeply personal, like a handshake with your past self. Not bad, you murmur through a mouthful. For someone with no yeast, the fire murmurs its approval, though a few embers fall as if to tease you for bragging. There's something deeply human about eating what you've made, especially when it's been coaxed from so little. You imagine your ancestors nodding somewhere, silently grating your loaf. You hope they're lenient. Here's your historical fact. Before baking powder and yeast became household staples, people relied on sourdough starters, living cultures of wild yeast. Families guarded them like heirlooms. Losing your starter was akin to losing a pet, or worse, your breakfast. Some households passed them down generations. A few surviving cultures today are hundreds of years old. You glance at your empty bowl and wonder if you could keep something alive that long. Probably not. You can barely keep your fire awake. Still, there's comfort in knowing that bread, simple, humble bread, carries a lineage. Each loaf a descendant of the last. You eat another piece, slower this time. The crust softens as it cools. The candle gutters. The world feels smaller again, safe within the kitchen's glow. From somewhere outside comes the faint hoot of an owl, a sound that could mean wisdom or hunger, depending on who you ask. You tilt your head, listen, then whisper, "You're not getting my bread," a joke for no one but the walls. You look around, the table, the hearth, the cooling loaf, and feel that gentle ache again. The beauty of ordinary survival. An obscure tidbit drifts into your mind. In some rural regions, people once believed that if you dropped bread on the floor, you had to pick it up and kiss it, lest you offend the spirit of grain. You smile faintly. Well, you murmur, no bread wasted here. Historians still debate whether such customs were superstition or affection. Maybe they were both. Maybe reverence doesn't need logic, only gratitude. The candle burns lower. You lean forward, chin in hand, and watch its tiny, steady flame. You think of all the kitchens that came before yours, all the winters survived, all the small acts of warmth that never made it into history books. Fires tended, loaves shared, soup stirred, hands thawed. And you realize, in the simplest way, that humanity's story has always been a kitchen story. Firelight on faces, breath fogging in cold air, the shared miracle of warmth. You exhale softly, the last of your breath mingling with the candle's glow. And for the briefest moment, everything, time, hunger, history, feels beautifully still. The night stretches its fingers along the walls, brushing every corner of the kitchen in quiet graze. The fire is low now, not gone, but tired, like an old storyteller who's run out of words but still wants to sit near the listeners. You feed it a few careful scraps of wood, and the flames return with a slow, dignified sigh. "You and me both," you whisper, watching the coals blush back to life. The air is heavy with the warmth of baking and wood smoke. It clings to your clothes, your hair, your skin. If comfort had a scent, this would be it. Toasted bread, cooling ash, faint wax. You feel the day's weight ease from your shoulders as though the kitchen itself is offering a quiet embrace. In the flickering light, the table looks like a memory. Flour dusted across its surface, a loaf with a missing corner, crumbs scattered like stars. You find yourself tracing little circles in the flour without thinking. Maybe you're drawing maps of places you'll never go, or maybe you're just giving your hand something to do so your mind can drift. Outside, the world holds its breath. You can almost hear the snow settling on rooftops, the groan of wooden beams adjusting to the cold. There's something intimate about a silent night like this. It's as if the earth itself is trying to fall asleep. Your major historical fact for tonight. In many medieval homes, the kitchen wasn't even inside the main building. It was often a separate structure built a few paces away, partly to reduce the risk of fire, partly because smoke had a habit of ignoring chimneys. It meant that on cold nights, the cook had to cross frozen ground just to stir the stew or check the bread. You picture it now. A figure wrapped in shawls, a lantern swinging in the dark, snow crunching beneath their boots. Inside, The fire crackles, waiting like a patient animal. You can almost hear the sigh when they open the door. You lean back in your chair, smile faintly, and think, some things never change. Your own fire pops loudly, like it's agreeing. There's a superstition that if a log cracks sharply in the hearth, it means a visitor's coming. You glance at the door just to humor the idea. Nothing but shadows and the whisper of the wind. Still, you murmur, whoever you are, bring tea. You can feel your eyelids getting heavier, not from exhaustion, but from the gentle hypnosis of rhythm. The rise and fall of the flame, the soft rustle of embers, the distant moan of winter's breath. Historians still debate whether early people thought of fire as alive or sacred. Some records suggest prayers whispered to the hearth each morning. Small blessings to keep it burning. Maybe you're not so different. You whisper your own small wish. Stay. You close your eyes for a moment and listen to the kitchen symphony. The faint tap of cooling bread, the shifting coals, the sigh of wood as it burns itself to dust. Somewhere in the background of time, thousands of other fires are breathing too. In stone huts, wooden cottages, clay homes, tents, all keeping someone company in the dark. And you realize, the story of cooking in winter isn't about recipes or tools. It's about the persistence of warmth, about daring to find comfort when the world outside is frozen. You smile sleepily, as though the kitchen has told you a secret you were meant to remember. And for a long, quiet moment you simply sit there, surrounded by warmth, time, and everything human that refuses to fade. Morning again, though it arrives without ceremony. A slow silvering of light over frost-laced glass. You wake to the gentle crackle of coals still clinging to life. A good omen, you decide. You've kept the night alive. The air is cool enough that your breath ghosts in front of you. You stretch, yawn, and pull your shawl tighter around your shoulders. The first sound of the day is the faint drip of thawing icicles outside. A small rhythm that might as well be music. You walk to the window, brush away the fog with your sleeve, and stare out. The world is pale and hushed, dressed in snow. The village, or what little you can see of it, looks carved from pearl. You imagine every chimney puffing its own little cloud of warmth, each one a heartbeat in the white silence. Morning ghosts. You murmur to no one in particular. Your stomach reminds you that admiration doesn't equal breakfast. You turn back to the hearth, stir the embers, and coax a flame to life with slow, patient breaths. The fire rewards you. A flash of gold, a rush of heat, and a faint smell of yesterday's smoke. You find the bread from last night, hard now but not hopeless. You slice it thin, hold it near the fire, and watch it brown. It's a small ritual, but it feels sacred, like lighting a candle for the day. Your historical fact for the morning. In 18th century Europe, breakfast was often the simplest meal. Leftover bread, a sip of ale, or a spoon of porridge. Coffee and tea were luxuries for many. Even milk was precious in winter. People didn't eat to indulge, they ate to endure. You take a bite. The bread is rough, smoky, but somehow perfect. You nod in solemn approval, as though you've just earned your place in history. Then, quietly amused, you add, "I'd still kill for some butter." The kitchen seems to agree with a small pop from the fire. There's an obscure little fact floating through your memory, that some households used to rub garlic on bread before toasting it, not for flavor, but to ward off sickness and spirits. You try to imagine explaining garlic toast as a medical procedure. "Doctor's orders," you'd say, biting down with confidence. Historians still debate how much of such folklore was belief versus habit. But perhaps belief was the medicine, the quiet faith that even small acts could keep you safe. You sit down again, the slice of bread in one hand, the mug of warm water in the other. The candle from last night has burned itself into a puddle of wax. The air smells faintly of smoke, sleep, and old dreams. It's peaceful in a way modern mornings rarely are. No clocks, no alarms, no glowing screens demanding your attention. Just the soft glow of the fire and the slow unfolding of a day that expects nothing of you but to exist. You think of all the kitchens across history that started this same way. The same small hunger, the same stubborn will to find warmth and comfort in ordinary things. You close your eyes and imagine them. A Roman matron stirring her hearth fire, a Viking wife pouring mead into a horn cup, a Chinese grandmother stoking coals beneath a clay pot. Different languages, same rhythm. Different faces, same morning. And maybe that's the quiet truth of it all, that kitchens are not just rooms but continuities. Warm threads sewn through centuries. You smile softly, take another bite, and let the warmth fill you. Outside, the world is still cold. But in here, the day has begun again. Patient, steady, and beautifully human. You hear it before you feel it. The soft creak of the wooden beams expanding in the morning light. The faint hum of the world stretching itself awake. The kitchen seems to sigh with you, as though sharing in the slow pleasure of being alive, if only to keep the fire going a little longer. You shuffle across the stone floor, the chill biting your bare feet just enough to make you regret not finding your slippers. The air smells faintly of smoke and bread crust. Comforting, familiar, and a little melancholy, like the memory of a lullaby you once knew. The fire is still whispering in the grate, but it needs encouragement. You kneel down, gather the coals, and coax them with the patience of a priest tending an altar flame. The first spark leaps up, golden and fragile, catching on the smallest twig. You sit back, satisfied. "See," you say quietly, "still got it." And the fire, your oldest friend by now, replies with a polite crackle, as though bowing in gratitude. Your major historical fact for this morning. In many 17th and 18th century homes, people kept their kitchen fires burning continuously throughout winter, for months at a time. If it went out, it wasn't just inconvenient. It was dangerous. They'd have to run to a neighbor's hearth with a covered pot to borrow fire. Like asking for a cup of sugar, except with more urgency and frostbite involved. You imagine that small parade of cold souls, trudging through snow, clutching smoldering embers wrapped in cloth. There's something poetic in it, one person's warmth kindling another's survival. You glance at your own fire. "We're doing all right," you say. "Let's not make me borrow from the neighbors." The humor warms the air just a bit more. An obscure cultural tidbit drifts into your sleepy thoughts. In some Slavic traditions, the hearth was considered the soul of the household. When a family moved, they would carry a glowing coal from the old fire to light the new one, so their ancestors' warmth never left them. You think about that for a long moment, feeling the weight of it. Maybe you, too, carry small embers from places you've left behind, moments of warmth disguised as memory. Outside, the sky has brightened, but not by much. It's that pale kind of morning light that looks tired before it even begins. You glance out the frosted window, and the landscape glows faintly. White fields, crooked trees, a horizon blurred like watercolor. Historians still debate whether early kitchens were social spaces or strictly utilitarian. But sitting here, surrounded by quiet warmth and the slow rhythm of domestic life, It's hard to imagine not talking here. Not laughing, whispering secrets, or sharing dreams over flickering light. You think of laughter echoing off stone walls, of stories told between stirring and chopping, of love that tastes like soup and smells like ash. You reach for a small pot, fill it with water and set it over the fire. The crackle turns to a soft hiss as the metal warms. You don't even know what you'll make yet. Maybe tea, maybe something resembling broth. It doesn't matter. The act itself is enough. And somewhere between that thought and the next, time slows. You lean your head against your hand and just watch the steam rise, curling through the air like a ghost from another century. You could swear it carries whispers, recipes, prayers, promises, all in languages you don't know but somehow understand. You close your eyes. The kitchen breathes with you. Later that day, the light fades again, as it always does, as it always will. The rhythm of the winter kitchen is not in minutes or hours, but in flame and shadow. You can tell it's evening because the air tastes different, colder, sharper, tinged with the metallic scent of frost sneaking through cracks in the door. You pull your shawl tighter and stir the pot one last time. Dinner is humble but proud. A thick stew of root vegetables and whatever else survived the week. It's not fancy, but it's the kind of meal that earns silence and gratitude. You sit at the table, spoon in hand, and listen to the faint pop of the fire. The shadows on the walls dance lazily, stretching and shrinking like tired actors. There's a kind of intimacy in eating alone by firelight. Not loneliness, exactly. More like communion with something older and quieter than yourself. You take a bite. The stew is too hot at first, but that's part of the ritual, the small, living reminder that warmth still exists. You wait, blow gently, and try again. Perfect. Your historical fact for tonight. In medieval Europe, salt wasn't just a seasoning. It was a preservative so precious that it shaped entire economies. Some towns were founded purely for access to salt, and travelers often paid tolls in handfuls of it. Worth his salt wasn't just a phrase, it was literal. You glance down at the bowl in your hands, a small pinch of salt clinging to the rim, and smile. Guess that makes me a rich person tonight. The kitchen hums with approval, or maybe that's just the sound of boiling stew echoing in old pots. An obscure tidbit comes to mind, one you once read somewhere and never forgot. In certain parts of Northern Europe, people used to place a pinch of salt in the corner of the kitchen to keep out mischievous spirits. You imagine a little ghost sulking in the doorway, thwarted by a condiment. "Sorry, friend," you murmur. "House rules." You take another spoonful, the warmth spreading through you like sunlight under skin. Historians still debate whether winter recipes evolved out of scarcity or creativity, whether humanity's greatest dishes were born from desperation or imagination. But maybe those two things aren't opposites. Maybe they're siblings. You lean back in your chair, resting your spoon, and glance toward the small window again. Outside, night has fully arrived, a quiet, endless blue swallowing the world. But the stars look closer than they have in months, as if drawn toward your little fire. For a moment, you let yourself imagine that the stars are just other kitchens, distant fires flickering in the black, each one holding someone somewhere trying to stay warm. And suddenly, you don't feel quite so alone. The fire sighs again, softer this time, and you realize it's winding down. You feed it one more log, the gesture half practical, half affectionate. "Stay a while longer," you whisper. The log catches, the light glows, and the kitchen is golden again. There's a small satisfaction in knowing that even after the stew is gone, the warmth will remain. in the coals, in the air, in the slow heartbeat of the house. You stretch, yawn, and settle into your chair as though it might cradle you until morning. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howls, low, mournful, not threatening but nostalgic, like a song that's been passed through generations. And you think, not for the first time, maybe this is what history really is. Not kings or wars, not inventions or records, but warmth. The quiet persistence of fire in a world that keeps trying to go cold. You let that thought linger until even the wind outside seems to agree. Then you close your eyes and let the kitchen, the fire, and the centuries hold you in their quiet, golden arms. Morning again, though you wouldn't know it from the light. It's a dim, silvery thing that barely pushes through the frosted window. You wake to the gentle tick of cooling embers, the smell of last night's stew still clinging faintly to the air, and that familiar hum of cold settling into everything it can touch. You pull the blanket tighter around your shoulders. The kitchen feels half asleep too, every wooden surface glinting dully in the pale glow. You move toward the hearth like a pilgrim approaching a sacred site. The ashes are cold on top, but if you brush them aside just right, you find life underneath. A single coal, glowing faintly, stubborn as an old cat refusing to die. You smile. "Still here, are you?" You whisper. That coal, by the way, would have been precious once. Your historical fact for this morning. Before matches were common, keeping a fire alive was an essential survival skill. Households would often store hot embers in fireboxes or fire pots, clay or iron containers designed to keep heat for days. Losing your fire in winter wasn't just inconvenient. It was catastrophic. You'd have to trek to your neighbor's hearth, clutching a covered pot, to borrow some flame. You imagine the scene, a middle-aged man trudging through snow, muttering, "Forgot to feed the fire again." Like someone today might say they forgot to charge their phone. The kitchen seems to chuckle with you, faintly amused. You stir the fire to life, feed it a few twigs, and listen to it grow. There's something deeply comforting in that sound. The slow, sure rhythm of crackling wood, the hiss of moisture turning to vapor. It's like the house's own heartbeat returning. Once it's alive again, you hang a pot of water over it. The act feels ceremonial, a promise of continuity. You move quietly, each motion deliberate, the way people move when they live with limited light and long winters. An obscure tidbit comes to mind as you stir the pot. In some regions of Europe, people would bake bread once a week, or even once a month, and store it high above the hearth, letting it harden until it could be sliced with a saw and softened in soup. You can't help but smile. Bread so tough you needed tools. Sounds like a metaphor for winter itself. The air inside the kitchen warms gradually. You reach for a small mug, the one with the tiny chip near the rim, and pour yourself some hot water. Not tea, not broth, just warmth in liquid form. Feels like luxury. Outside, the wind picks up, brushing against the window with a low sigh. You watch frost creep along the glass in delicate, branching veins. The world looks frozen but strangely alive, like it's dreaming under ice. Historians still debate whether rural life in winter was peaceful or oppressive. But as you sit here, watching the firelight flicker across ancient wood, you think it was both. A test of patience and a teacher of simplicity. You sip slowly. The warmth travels through your chest, down to your hands, and out into the cold air that dares to exist in your kitchen. You breathe it out again, steam mingling with smoke, as though you're part of the same old rhythm. Inhale the past, exhale the present. You lean back, and for a moment, everything is still. The air hums softly with that old, gentle truth. Survival can be beautiful, if done slowly. By late afternoon, the light has turned gold. Not the bright, celebratory gold of summer, but the muted kind that feels like it's been steeped in tea and memory. You've been busy, though busy here means something quieter than it does today. You've sliced root vegetables, turned grain into coarse meal, and mended the tear in your apron. Everything is a little slower in the winter kitchen. But slow is not the same as idle. It's deliberate, intentional, patient. You glance around and realize how much this space has changed since the first frost. The walls are darker with smoke stains, the pots blackened and proud, the table scattered with crumbs of life. The kitchen has aged with the season, like the lines deepening on an old friend's face. Your historical fact for this section. Many early households used communal ovens, especially in crowded towns or villages. People would knead their dough at home, mark it with a personal symbol, like initials or a pattern, and carry it to the shared oven. A kind of neighborhood rhythm formed: bread days, baking rotations, gossip exchanged over baskets. Imagine the chatter. Your loaf rose better than mine. Did you hear about the miller's new apprentice? The bishop's dog ate half the butter again. You smile. The idea of warmth shared so publicly feels almost radical today. As you stir the pot, another humble stew, flavored more by patience than spice. You recall an obscure tidbit about winter cooking. In 18th century Northern Europe, people sometimes used heated stones dropped into soup pots to keep food hot when wood was scarce. Stones, it turns out, hold heat surprisingly well. So if you ever feel like your dinner's gone cold, you could always try geology. The fire crackles approvingly, as if amused by the image of someone ladling soup around a rock. You sit down again, watching shadows lengthen on the walls. It's that part of the day when the world feels like it's holding its breath. Neither day nor night, just suspended warmth and flickering light. Historians still debate how people perceived time before the industrial age, whether they felt its flow as we do, or if life unfolded more cyclically, like seasons looping endlessly. But you suspect that in kitchens like this, time was measured not by hours, but by the lifespan of coals, the rising of bread, the cooling of tea. You place your hand near the fire and close your eyes. You can almost feel centuries overlapping. Kitchens upon kitchens, fires upon fires, all tending to the same quiet task of turning scarcity into comfort. You imagine a medieval woman warming her hands the same way, a 17th century baker scraping ash from his oven, a 19th century mother whispering lullabies beside a stove. Different lives, same glow. You open your eyes and realize that the pot has started to simmer. Slow bubbles rising, releasing a scent that feels like nostalgia itself. Dinner will be ready soon. And just as you think that, a thought wanders in, small but profound. Maybe warmth isn't something you make. Maybe it's something you keep alive. The firelight wavers as if agreeing. You lean your head on your arm, eyelids heavy. The kitchen hums its eternal lullaby, crackle, sigh, hush. And before you realize it, you've drifted halfway into sleep, the scent of stew and the sound of history blending into something timeless and deeply kind. When you wake, the world feels muffled. It's that strange, soft hour before dawn when even the fire seems to sleep. The embers glow faintly, a quiet constellation in the black belly of the hearth. You stretch beneath your shawl, half expecting to see frost forming on your breath. The kitchen smells faintly of smoke, stale bread, and life that refuses to end quietly. The table still holds the bowl from last night's meal, a small reminder of time's gentle persistence. You don't rush to clean it. In this winter kitchen, nothing is hurried. Even decay feels polite. You stand, moving slowly, Your feet find the same creaky plank they always do, the one that sounds like it's sighing at you. You step off it quickly, as if to say, "Not today, old friend." Your first task is the same as it always is: check the fire. You kneel before it, brush aside the cold ash, and coax out the faintest whisper of warmth. One spark. Two. Careful breath. The glow returns, timid but obedient, like a small, shy animal learning to trust again. That's your major historical fact of the day. Before matches and lighters, rekindling a fire each morning was an art form. Many households used a tool called a tinderbox, a small kit containing flint, steel, and dried fungus or plant fiber, often called charcloth. Striking a spark wasn't easy. It took skill, rhythm, and a fair bit of stubbornness. There's even evidence that some families passed down their favorite tinderbox like a family heirloom. Imagine inheriting not jewelry, but a spark. As the flames gather strength, the kitchen slowly transforms, from gray to amber, from frozen to living. You pour a little water into the iron pot, just enough to make a morning broth. The sound it makes, the faint hiss as water hits hot metal, is almost sacred. In that moment, you're not just making breakfast. You're negotiating peace with winter itself. You sit by the fire as it begins to boil, wrapping your shawl tighter. The world beyond the window is just beginning to glow. Faint outlines of rooftops, smoke curling from chimneys, and snow that looks more like silk than ice. You think of all the other kitchens waking just like this one. Fires flickering to life, porridge thickening. Someone somewhere grumbling about how long it takes for water to heat. Your obscure tidbit comes to mind. In early modern Europe, some households hung warming stones, smooth rocks wrapped in linen, near the hearth. These were carried to bed or even tucked inside clothing to fight the cold. In the morning, they'd be placed back by the fire for reuse. One 18th century diary even mentions a woman naming her favorite stone George. You smile at that. "Good morning, George." You murmur at your own hearth, feeling oddly seen. Historians still debate whether winter life in pre-industrial homes was unbearably harsh or simply slower, quieter, more cyclical. But sitting here, you think it's both. Yes, it was cold, yes, it was hard, but it was also honest. There's no faking comfort when fire is your only friend. You ladle out the broth and sip it slowly. It tastes of salt, ash, and contentment. For a moment, everything feels perfectly balanced. The fire humming low, the light soft and forgiving, your breath steady. You're not surviving winter, you're sharing space with it. And as the day begins, you realize something. Warmth isn't only heat, it's habit. It's the small rituals that turn existence into something resembling peace. By midday, the kitchen has come alive. The fire is strong now, licking at the iron pot with quiet determination. The light from the small window catches the steam and turns it gold. You stand by the table, grinding coarse salt between your fingers, feeling its roughness. A tiny defiance against all that is smooth and frozen outside. The world hums softly, in rhythm with your movements. The cutting of turnips, the clink of pottery, the sound of your sleeve brushing against wood. Each act is deliberate, like a prayer disguised as work. Today, you're preparing what might have been called winter pottage, a stew of whatever could be spared from the root cellar. Carrots, leeks, barley, perhaps a bone or two if fortune allows. In centuries past, this was the universal meal of winter, humble, filling, and endlessly recycled. That's your historical fact. Pottage was the staple dish of medieval and early modern Europe, eaten by peasants and nobility alike. The difference wasn't in the recipe, but in what went into the pot. For some, it was beef and herbs. For others, it was hope and turnips. You stir the pot gently. The scent rises, earthy and comforting. You imagine families huddled together in tiny cottages, each spoonful a small rebellion against hunger. The air inside is warm enough now that you can take off your shawl. You hang it on the chair by the door, where it'll gather the faint perfume of smoke and stew. You look around and realize everything here serves a purpose. No object is merely decorative. Every tool earns its keep. Your obscure tidbit. In some northern villages, people used bread trenchers, thick, stale slabs of bread used as plates. After eating the stew or meat placed on top, they'd either eat the trencher itself, now softened by gravy, or give it to the poor. It's efficient, sustainable, and, well, deliciously practical. You smile. Eat your bowl. You whisper to no one in particular. The fire crackles approvingly, throwing orange light across the floor. Historians still debate the extent to which people romanticize their own hardships. Did they complain as much as we do? Did they find joy in small things, or simply endure them? You suspect both, because even now, in your warm little kitchen, with soup bubbling away and frost tracing lacework on the glass, there's a thread of melancholy woven through it all. The beauty of it is inseparable from the fragility. You ladle a portion into a bowl and sit at the table. The first spoonful is steam and memory. The second is warmth and silence. You think of those who cooked before you, the hands that chopped, stirred, waited, all of them chasing the same simple dream, to make something warm out of something meager. Outside, the snow falls again, each flake landing like a quiet applause. You lean back, the fire whispering soft approval, and the kitchen settles around you like an old friend saying, "You've done enough for today." You close your eyes for just a moment. The world hums, the stew simmers, and history, ever patient, keeps cooking quietly beside you. You wake later than usual. The light has already turned pale gold, the kind that spills over the floorboards and makes dust motes look like snowflakes caught in amber. The fire, miraculously, has survived the night. You don't remember feeding it. Maybe it pitted you. The kitchen feels older today, somehow. The air is thick with the smell of last night's stew, faintly sour but comforting. You stretch, rubbing your arms, and the world around you creaks in acknowledgement. The chair complains as you sit down, the wood groaning like an old storyteller. You reach for the iron kettle, heavy and soot-streaked, and set it back over the coals. The hiss of water against hot metal is instant, that tiny, perfect sound of life returning. You breathe it in. Today is for bread. You decide this without ceremony, as if the idea had been sitting in your pocket all night waiting for you to notice. Bread, in any age, is more than food. It's memory, patience, and something close to faith. Here's your historical fact. In the medieval and early modern world, bread wasn't just a staple. It was a calendar. Harvest seasons, feast days, and even local identities were measured by which bread was being baked. There was rye bread in the north, barley in the highlands, wheat where wealth lived, and oatcakes wherever poverty had a sense of humor. You take your wooden bowl, the one that's seen more winters than you have, and begin mixing flour, a bit of salt, and whatever water's left from the kettle. No yeast today, you'll let the air do the work. People used to call it wild bread when it rose this way, as if the dough itself had a personality. Your hands move slowly, kneading rhythm into silence. The dough clings to your fingers, reluctant to let go. Like every good thing in winter, an obscure tidbit bubbles up. In parts of Eastern Europe, bakers used to whisper blessings into the dough, believing that words could help it rise. Some even avoided arguing near their bread, fearing bad tempers would make it fall flat. You glance around your quiet kitchen and mutter softly, "Rise if you like, I won't stop you." Historians still debate whether such rituals were purely symbolic or genuinely believed to affect the outcome. But you think it hardly matters. In a cold world, any ritual that promises warmth is worth keeping. You place the dough near the fire to rise. Time passes like honey, slow, golden, and reluctant to leave the spoon. You tidy the table, wipe the flour with the back of your hand, and find yourself humming. It's not a song you recognize. Maybe it's just the sound bread makes before it exists. When it's ready, you bake it in the small clay oven by the hearth. The scent that follows is impossible to overstate. It smells like forgiveness, like the promise that something soft can survive even in a season of stone. You break the first loaf open with your hands. Steam curls up, and the crust crackles like a sigh of relief. You spread a bit of honey, just enough to gild the moment, and take a bite. It's warm, imperfect, and absolutely enough. You lean back, watching the light shift across the kitchen, and think, this is what history tastes like. Not the grand feasts, not the royal banquets, but this. A quiet loaf, a flickering fire, and the simple audacity to call it good. By afternoon, the wind changes. You can feel it before you hear it, that faint trembling in the windows, like the breath of something ancient trying to get in. You stir the embers, watching the fire's orange eyes blink awake. The bread from earlier sits cooling on the table, already half gone. You've been breaking off pieces all day, absent-mindedly feeding yourself like a bird that forgot it had wings. Outside, the world is turning pale again. The sun hides behind a smear of cloud, and snow begins to drift down with the unhurried grace of someone who knows they're expected. You pull your shawl tighter and sit near the window, cup of broth in hand. It's thin, but it's warm, and that's enough. Here's your historical fact for this stretch of time. Before the 19th century, many people didn't actually cook in their kitchens every day. Firewood was too precious. Instead, they used communal ovens, large, shared hearths often built at the edge of villages. Each family would bring its dough or stew to bake, marked with unique patterns or symbols, so no one mixed them up. In some towns, the oven keeper was almost a sacred figure, part cook, part caretaker, part gossip broker. You imagine that scene. Villagers trudging through snow, loaves tucked under arms, exchanging quiet greetings. Steam rising from a single oven like breath from a sleeping giant. There's a strange beauty in that warmth, not as possession, but as participation. Everyone feeding one flame. Your obscure tidbit is one you can't quite forget. In certain mountain regions, people used to dry bread for months until it was nearly as hard as stone. When winter hit, they'd soak it in hot broth or wine to soften it again. Archaeologists have even found medieval bread knives shaped more like saws, not for slicing, but for surviving the food they'd already cooked. You grin faintly at the thought. Dinner and woodworking, all in one. Historians still debate whether such bread was practical necessity or social tradition. Maybe both. You think about your own loaf from this morning and wonder how much longer it would last if you were less sentimental about softness. The wind rattles again, harder now. You go to the door to check the latch. It holds, but the sound of the storm feels alive. A conversation you're not invited to join. You glance around your kitchen, taking stock. Bread, broth, a dwindling pile of firewood. Enough for now. The fire hums softly as if agreeing. You decide to do something old-fashioned, something even the scholars might approve of. You take the last of your flour and start a small batch of gruel. It's humble, nearly tasteless, but it fills the air with the smell of endurance. When it's done, you eat it slowly, one wooden spoon at a time. The window glows faintly from the reflection of the fire. You see yourself there, layered in shawl, hair undone, eyes heavy. You look like someone out of time, and maybe you are. Outside, the storm thickens. Inside, your small kitchen hums like a heart that refuses to quiet. You whisper a quiet goodnight to the wind, knowing it won't answer. Then you pull your blanket closer, and the fire's glow bends around you like a sigh. It's not a grand ending. It's just another evening survived, which, in this kind of winter, is the same thing as victory. The next morning greets you not with sunlight, but with a kind of pewter glow, soft, heavy, and oddly dignified. Snow has stacked itself against the windowsills overnight, as if trying to join you for breakfast. The fire has gone out completely this time, and the silence feels almost polite. You wrap yourself in your shawl before stepping into the kitchen. Everything has a thin frost sheen, from the ladle to the bread knife. You breathe out, watching your breath hover like a ghost that forgot to leave. Today feels like a test of patience or stubbornness, maybe both. You start by rebuilding the fire. It takes longer than it should. The kindling's damp, your fingers are clumsy, and the smoke seems to prefer the indoors. But when that first spark catches, that orange glow trembling into life, you feel like you've summoned a small sun. Here's your historical fact for the day. In 18th century England and France, the hearth wasn't just the center of the home, it was literally the symbol of life. When a family moved to a new house, they often carried a small ember from their old fire to ignite the new one. It was called carrying the flame, and it meant continuity, the unbroken thread of warmth across generations. You can't help but smile at the thought. The sentimental, sure, but isn't all warmth sentimental in the end? The fire grows. The crackle of kindling gives way to a steady hum, and the kitchen begins to breathe again. You set a small pot of porridge on the heat and add a scrap of salt, the last bit you've been saving. Outside, the snow keeps falling. Inside, time folds softly. An obscure tidbit drifts into your mind, one you once read about Scandinavian winters. In old farmhouses, people used to bake slabs of thin, crisp bread in late autumn, enough to last months. They'd hang them from rafters, threaded like garlands, where they'd dry and harden in the cold air. Visitors could just break off a piece when they came by. Bread as decoration, food as furniture. You look up at your ceiling and laugh quietly. You've hung herbs and onions before, but bread? That's bold. You picture it now, the kitchen strung with golden rounds like edible constellations. Historians still debate whether such practices were purely for preservation or if they had symbolic meanings, a way to invite abundance by displaying what you had. Maybe both. In this light, even superstition feels practical. The porridge thickens. You stir it slowly, savoring the rhythm. Scrape, swirl, scrape. You add a splash of honey and a bit of leftover milk, watching it bloom into gold. You eat by the window, spoon in hand, while snow continues its quiet campaign outside. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolls, faint, slow, and entirely unbothered by your existence. You think about how many kitchens have existed like this, how many hands have stirred, scraped, tasted. How many mornings began with fire coaxed from ash and a prayer for one more day of enough. You don't need an empire for meaning, just a bowl of porridge and a stubborn flame. You finish eating, pull the blanket around your shoulders and sit by the fire. The crackle is the only conversation you need. The world can stay cold for now. You've got your small son to tend. Later that day, the light begins to turn strange, a kind of twilight gold that doesn't belong to afternoon or evening. The snow outside reflects it, glowing faintly as though the ground itself remembers summer. You're kneeling near the hearth, turning a small log over, when you notice the smell, faintly metallic, like the air before rain. But it's not rain season, and this isn't summer. This is winter playing tricks again. You sigh, stretch, and decide to take a small walk, just to the edge of the yard. The cold hits you like an idea you didn't ask for, but it's clean and bracing. The snow crunches underfoot with that satisfying sound. Part whisper, part sigh. The world feels paused. No birds, no footsteps, just the soft ticking of flakes landing on your sleeves. You remember something from an old diary you read once. A note written by a woman in 1798 who described her kitchen as the heart that beat when the world forgot to. You think she must have known this feeling, standing between frost and flame, holding on to both. Here's your historical fact for this part of the journey. Before the Industrial Revolution, most cooking fires used peat instead of wood in colder climates, compacted moss and soil cut from the earth and dried like bricks. It burned slow, steady, and smoky, giving everything it touched a faintly earthy scent. Even tea brewed over peat tasted like soil and smoke. You imagine that flavor, bitter, grounding, maybe a little haunting. Back inside, you decide to try something daring. Baking apples. You still have two, bruised but loyal. You slice them, sprinkle the last of your sugar, and place them in a small iron pan by the coals. The air fills with sweetness almost immediately. An obscure tidbit comes to mind. In early 19th century Russia, people believed baked apples could ward off melancholy. Warm fruit, warm heart. One saying went. You'd like to think that's true. The smell deepens, curling around you like music. The edges of the slices begin to caramelize, and the skin blisters slightly, little banners of amber. You prod one with a fork. Perfect. You eat slowly, eyes half closed. The taste is simple, sweet, smoky, and deeply kind. Historians still debate whether domestic rituals like these, warming fruit, stirring soups, tending fires, were acts of survival or expressions of something deeper, a kind of quiet artistry. Maybe both. You lean toward the latter. There's something in these small gestures that feels closer to prayer than practicality. When you finish, you sit back and watch the firelight flicker against the wall. The shadows move like dancers, not quite graceful but sincere. Outside, the wind begins again, but softer this time. Less a threat, more a conversation. You close your eyes and listen to it. There's no grand revelation waiting here. No empire rises, no invention is born. Just a kitchen in winter, a fire that hums, and you, alive, still, despite the cold's best efforts. You smile faintly and whisper to the air. You'll have to try harder than that. The fire crackles in agreement, and for a moment you swear it laughs. The morning wakes you gently this time. No gusts, no shrieks through the chimney, just that soft gray light that leaks in like a slow confession. The fire has gone out again, but the embers still whisper beneath the ash, glowing faintly like sleepy eyes. You breathe out a fog and mutter to yourself, something between a curse and a thank you. You survived another night of the quiet siege. You stretch, pull your shawl tight, and shuffle toward the table where last night's crumbs still linger. Tiny artifacts of survival. The world outside your window is white beyond reason, so white it feels almost holy. a winter cathedral without walls. And in the center of this silence sits you, the priest, the congregation, and the keeper of one small, flickering warmth. You set about the daily rite of resurrection, coaxing the fire back to life. There's an art to it now, a rhythm. The flint, the spark, the patience. Feels a bit like gardening, only instead of watering, you breathe. As the flame catches, you hum an old tune. Something you half remember. Something your grandmother used to hum when stirring a pot of stew. Here's your historical fact for the morning. In early 19th century kitchens, many cooks, especially in rural areas, used singing as a timer. Bread songs, stew songs, even porridge refrains. The rhythm of the tune helped them track time before clocks were common in homes. Pot was ready when the song ended. You grin at the thought, kitchen music as culinary chronometer. You hum louder just to keep the tradition alive. When the pot finally begins to simmer again, the smell of grain and smoke wraps itself around you. It's humble, comforting, and just slightly burnt. Like every great meal made by necessity. The warmth loosens your fingers. You take a seat by the window and stare at the world that's turned to lace. Every tree is jeweled in frost, every roof crowned with ice. If it weren't for the hunger in your belly and the stiffness in your toes, you'd call it beautiful without condition. Then comes the sound, faint but unmistakable. The creak of a cart will somewhere in the distance. You freeze. For weeks you've heard nothing human. The sound is as alien as a bell underwater. You press your hand to the window pane, squinting through the frost. There, movement. A man with a cart, bundled in furs, trudging through the white. You don't wave, you just watch. The sight of another living soul is enough to anchor you. It reminds you that you're not the last ember in the world. Not yet. An obscure tidbit floats up while you watch him fade into the distance. During long winters in isolated villages, travelers would carry a pocket hearth, a small clay pot filled with hot coals from their last fire, wrapped in cloth. They'd use it to start the next one wherever they stopped. Fire carried like memory. You like that idea that every flame was once part of another flame. That warmth is not created, but borrowed, passed on. Historians still debate whether such travelers were merchants or messengers, whether they brought trade or news. But right now it doesn't matter. The thought that someone's footsteps are breaking through the snow near yours is enough. You sip your tea, smoky, bitter, and alive, and let the warmth crawl back into your bones. The day has barely begun, and already, you feel like you've lived something sacred. That night, the wind returns, but with less cruelty. More of a companionable mutter than a scream. You're used to it now, its patterns, its size, the way it flirts with the eaves before dying out again. The kitchen glows low and golden. You've got the kettle simmering, a few roots stewing in the pot, and an apple slice left for dessert. The fire dances lazily, its edges blue and shy. You settle into your chair with a sound that's half sigh, half surrender. Outside, the snow has softened the world so completely that even sound seems to move slower. Every creak, every pop of the fire echoes longer than it should. You close your eyes and listen to the rhythm. It's hypnotic. And because your mind refuses to sit still, it drifts, not forward, not back, but sideways, into thoughts of kitchens long vanished. Roman hearths where cooks roasted dormice. Medieval castles with roaring spits that turned whole beasts. Victorian stoves blackened with decades of effort. All these kitchens, all these hands, and now yours, keeping the oldest ritual alive. The transformation of cold into warmth, hunger into comfort. Here's your historical fact tonight. In ancient Japan, some homes used hibachi, small, ornate bowls filled with charcoal, not only to warm hands but also to cook simple meals during winter. They were both utility and art, carved, lacquered, and cherished. Families passed them down as heirlooms because warmth, too, was considered a legacy. You open your eyes, imagining one sitting on your table, glowing softly, smoke curling like calligraphy. It's beautiful, isn't it? How even survival can be elegant when given time and care. You reach for your cup, take a sip, and almost laugh. The tea's gone cold. So much for elegance. You set it back down and poke the fire instead, watching the sparks leap and fade. Each spark feels like a tiny story ending in mid-sentence. An obscure tidbit to keep you company. In early European winters, it was common for people to sit near the hearth and tell ember stories. Short tales that had to end before the last ember went out. If it didn't, it was said that the fire spirits would steal your voice by morning. You chuckle softly. Fire spirits, you murmur, glancing at the coals. You'll have to take a number. Historians still debate whether ember stories were just superstition or a clever parental invention to get children to sleep early. But either way, the thought comforts you. There's something poetic about racing the dying light with a story. You look around your little kitchen. The soot stains, the sagging shelves, the window pane etched with frost, and you realize this place has become your ember story. A tale told softly to the dark, fading only when the warmth does. You draw your blanket tighter, tilt your head against the chair, and let the hum of the fire do the talking. It's not a grand ending, not a revelation, just another night where you've managed to keep the cold at bay. And that, in itself, feels like victory. The kitchen glows a little longer, then slowly fades into its own dream. The morning arrives softly, without edges. Not a sunrise but a slow, forgiving brightening of gray. You stir awake to the whisper of the hearth's last embers, glowing faintly like buried stars under a dusting of ash. You stretch, your joints cracking like old wood in winter. The room smells faintly of smoke, bread, and survival. The fire, your quiet companion, gives one last sigh before fading into stillness. You kneel beside it, coaxing the coals with the tip of the poker, like waking a sleepy pet. Nothing. Not even a spark in protest. You stare at it for a moment, this little pile of memory, and think, how strange that something so small can hold so much of your story. You bundle yourself in your thickest shawl, open the door, and step into the white. The snow is soft and clean now, untouched by wind. The sky is pale, almost colorless, like old parchment. You breathe in, and the air cuts sharp but not cruel, the kind of cold that feels alive, almost playful. Your boots crunch as you walk toward the edge of the yard. The fence posts peek from the snow like weary sentinels. Beyond them, the world stretches out into a soft, endless quilt. You pause there, hands wrapped around your shoulders, and listen. No birds, no cartwheels. Just that sacred silence that winter wears so proudly. You imagine the hum of kitchens all across time, Roman, Japanese, medieval, Victorian, each one with its own rhythm, its own warmth, its own small rebellion against the season. Here's your historical fact for the day. In 18th century France, before matches were invented, many households kept a small iron box called a coffre à feu or fire chest, filled with smoldering embers covered in ash. A servant's daily task was to carry those embers to relight the morning hearth. You smile at the thought, a job title you'd never want, keeper of the almost fire. Then again, maybe you already are. You glance back at your house, smoke just beginning to rise again from the chimney. The morning fire has taken. A small, defiant miracle. There's a peace in that. A quiet triumph no one will record. No one will name. But in this frozen world, survival is its own kind of art. You head back inside, brush the snow from your boots, and feel the wave of warmth greet you like an old friend. You sit down by the fire, sip from a cup of weak tea, and feel, for the first time in what feels like forever, content. An obscure tidbit floats to mind. In the far north, some ancient families believed that the first cup of hot liquid each morning carried the soul of the household spirit. If you spilled it, bad luck followed. If you shared it, the gods smiled. You lift your cup slightly, to no one in particular, and whisper, "Here's to you, old house." Historians still debate whether that belief was spiritual, symbolic, or just a polite way of saying, "Don't waste the good stuff." But for you, it feels like a blessing, a quiet benediction at the end of a long winter's story. The fire cracks, the snow drifts, the world exhales, and now the season begins to turn, slowly, reluctantly, like an old clock winding itself awake after a long nap. The days stretch just a little longer. The ice melts from the eaves, drop by patient drop. The air smells faintly of thawed earth and old leaves, like history stirring in its sleep. You move through your kitchen one last time, tracing your fingers across the table, the hearth, the window ledge carved by frost. Everything feels both fragile and eternal, as if winter's silence has etched itself into the walls. You pour the last of your tea, the steam curling up like ghostly handwriting. The fire burns gently, not with desperation now, but with the steady ease of routine. You know how to feed it, how to tend it, how to listen to its moods. It's not survival anymore. It's a friendship. And maybe that's what all of this has been about. Learning to live with what little warmth the world gives you, and to treat it like something sacred. You lean back in your chair. The firelight paints your face in shades of amber and gold. Outside, the snow reflects that same light back through the window, like the world itself is glowing just for you. There's a deep calm in the air, the kind that only comes after struggle. You close your eyes, and the sounds of centuries seem to gather. Spoons stirring in Roman pots, rice steaming over hibachi, bread rising in an English cottage. The universal music of kitchens through time. It's funny you think how history isn't just battles or kings or grand inventions. Sometimes it's just a person, sitting by a fire, making something warm. You breathe slowly, deeply. The world fades into softer colors. Parchment cream, smoke gray, hearth orange. Outside, the first bird of spring dares a note, small and uncertain. You smile without opening your eyes. Somewhere, beyond the horizon of snow and time, another hearth is being lit. Another story is beginning. And as your fire hums low, you whisper, half to yourself, half to the centuries. May your kitchen stay warm, and your winters merciful. The last spark glows, fades, and rests. The story ends not with a word, but a sigh. Good night.